Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. Okay, so this happened back when I was in high school, probably around my sophomore year, which would have been a good 10 years ago now. I still think about it all the time, and honestly, it's one of those things that just sticks with you, like a stain on your memory that won't wash out. I've never really told this to many people because it sounds crazy, but I figure if I'm putting it out here, maybe someone else has been through something similar and can make sense of it. Because I sure as hell can't. That day, it was a typical afternoon after school, nothing special. Me and my brother, he's a couple years younger than me, we'd gotten home and were bored out of our minds. We lived out in the sticks in Tennessee, surrounded by farmland and these thick woods that seemed to go on forever. Our house was kind of isolated, so we spent a lot of time outside just messing around. We had this old mini bike that our dad had fixed up for us. It was beat up and loud, but it got us around. That afternoon, we decided to go look for bait because we were planning to go fishing the next day. You know, worms and stuff. Nothing exciting, just something to do. The mini bike was parked in the shed, and I remember the smell of gasoline and dirt when we fired it up. It coughed and sputtered before the engine caught, and then we were off, bouncing down the gravel road that ran past our place. The sun was still up, but it was that late afternoon kind of light, where everything looks golden and shadows start getting long. The air was warm, but not too hot, with that humid Tennessee feel that makes your shirt stick to your back. We weren't wearing helmets or anything, just jeans and t-shirts, the way kids do when they're just riding around their own neighborhood. We headed down this gravel road that we knew pretty well. It cut between fields where farmers grew corn and soybeans, and on one side there was this wooded ridge that rose up steeply, covered in oaks and pines. The road was rough, full of potholes and loose stones, so we had to go slow sometimes. The mini bike's engine was noisy, but it was a familiar sound, and we'd shout over it to talk about stupid stuff, school, games, whatever. My brother was sitting behind me, holding onto the sides of the seat, and I could feel him shifting his weight every time we hit a bump. After a few minutes, we pulled over near a spot where the road curved, and there was a narrow path leading into the woods. We'd been here before to dig for worms because the soil was soft and damp under the trees. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence felt heavy, like someone had thrown a blanket over everything. The only sounds were the wind rustling the leaves and some birds chirping in the distance. We got off the mini bike and left it leaning against a tree by the roadside. We weren't worried about anyone stealing it out here. We started walking down the path, which was just wide enough for one person at a time. It was muddy in spots from recent rain, and our shoes sunk in a little. The air smelled earthy, like wet leaves and decay, with that sweet hint of wildflowers somewhere. We were joking around at first, poking at the ground with sticks, looking for places where worms might be. I remember my brother saying something about how we should have brought a bucket, but we figured we'd just use our hands or whatever we could find. We'd only gone maybe 20-30 yards into the woods when I started feeling weird. Not sick or anything, but just off. It's hard to describe, but it was like a switch flipped in my head. All of a sudden, the hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stood up. I got this heavy, prickling sensation, like someone was staring at me from behind. I stopped walking and looked around, but I didn't see anything at first. The woods were dense here, with lots of undergrowth and shadows, so it was easy to miss things. My brother must have felt it too, because he stopped beside me and was just staring ahead, his eyes wide. He didn't say anything, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. We both stood there for a second, listening. The birds had stopped chirping. That was the first thing I noticed. It got real quiet, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then I saw it. About 40 yards away, off to the right of the path, there was this large, dark shape among the mayapple plants. Mayapples are those low-growing plants with big leaves, and they were everywhere in that area, kind of forming a carpet under the trees. At first, I thought it was a bear or something because we had black bears around sometimes. But as my eyes focused, I realized it wasn't a bear. It was bigger, and it was standing, well, bent over, in a way that didn't look right for an animal. It was huge, way bigger than a person. I'm not tall, but this thing had to be at least 7 or 8 feet tall if it stood up straight. It was covered in dark, matted hair that looked almost black in the shadows, and it was bent over at the waist, raking through the mayapples with its long arms. Its arms were way longer than a human's, and they moved in this slow, deliberate way, like it was searching for something. The hair was thick and shaggy, kind of clumped together in places, and I could see muscles moving under it as it shifted. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I felt cold all over, even though it was warm out. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't move. I was frozen, just staring. My brother was next to me, and I heard him make this tiny, choked sound, like he was trying to say something but couldn't. We both knew we were seeing the same thing. It wasn't a person in a costume or anything. It was too big, too real. The way it moved was unnatural, but also too smooth for an animal. It didn't notice us at first, or if it did, it didn't care. It just kept raking through the plants, its head down so I couldn't see its face clearly. Then, as if it sensed us, it slowly straightened up. Not all the way, but enough that I could see how massive it was. Its shoulders were broad and hunched, and it turned its head slightly in our direction. I still couldn't see its face well. It was shadowy, but I got the impression of dark eyes or something deep set. That's when the fear really hit me. It was like a wave of ice water washing over me. Every instinct in my body was screaming to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I don't know how long we stood there, maybe only a few seconds, but it felt like hours. Then, without a word, my brother and I both turned at the same time and started running back toward the path. I didn't look back at first. I just focused on getting out of there. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, and my lungs burned with each breath. The path was narrow and muddy, and I slipped once, almost falling, but I caught myself and kept going. I could hear my brother right behind me, his footsteps sloshing in the mud. When we reached the road, I risked a glance back over my shoulder. The creature was still there, standing upright now, and it was watching us. It hadn't moved toward us, but just seeing it standing there, so still and massive, sent another jolt of terror through me. Its size was even more obvious out in the open light. It towered over the mayapples, and the dark hair seemed to absorb the light around it. I didn't wait to see more. I just sprinted for the mini-bike. We scrambled onto the mini-bike, and I fumbled with the key. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get it in the ignition. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I gunned it, spinning the back wheel and spitting gravel everywhere. We shot down the road, going faster than we ever had before. The wind whipped past us, and I leaned into the handlebars, trying to keep control. My brother was clutching my shirt so tight I thought he'd rip it. I didn't look back again. I just focused on the road ahead, watching the trees blur past. The ride home felt endless. Every bump in the road made me jump, and I kept expecting to see something chasing us. My mind was racing, trying to process what we'd seen. Was it a bear? No, it was too big, and the arms were too long. A person? Impossible. The more I thought about it, the more scared I got. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through me, making my hands tremble on the handles. When we got home, we skidded to a stop in the driveway and just sat there for a minute, breathing hard. The mini-bike's engine was still running, so I turned it off, and the silence felt even heavier than before. We got off and walked into the house without saying a word. Our mom was in the kitchen, and she asked if we were okay because we must have looked pale or something. We just mumbled that we were fine and went up to my room. Once we were alone, we tried to talk about it. but it was like we couldn't find the words. My brother kept shaking his head and saying, "Did you see that?" And I'd nod, but then we'd just stare at each other. We didn't want to sound crazy, so we didn't tell our parents or anyone else. What would we say? We saw a big hairy thing in the woods. They'd think we were making it up, or that it was a bear, but we both knew it wasn't. The rest of the day, we just kind of drifted around the house, not really doing anything. I remember sitting on my bed, staring out the window at the woods in the distance, and feeling this deep, cold fear settle in my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see it standing there, watching us. That image is burned into my brain, the dark shape among the green plants, the way it moved, the sheer size of it. Even now, years later, I get chills thinking about it. I've never gone back to that spot, and my brother doesn't like to talk about it either. Sometimes I wonder if we imagined it, but we both saw the same thing, and the fear was too real. It's one of those experiences that just doesn't have an explanation, and I guess it never will. I still don't know what it was, but I know it changed how I see the woods, and every time I hear a strange noise or feel like I'm being watched, I remember that afternoon and the thing we saw in the May apples. Story 2. I'm still not sure how to even start this. My hands are shaking a little just typing it out, even though it's been a couple of years. I've never posted this anywhere, never told anyone except the one contractor, because who would believe it? But I see people sharing their stuff here, things that don't make sense, and I guess I need to get it out there. Maybe someone else has seen what we saw. So my wife and I, we retired and wanted a quiet life. We'd saved up, and we found this place in southern Washington. It was a timber frame house, real solid, built in the 90s, sitting on a few acres that backed right up against this dense, dark stretch of forest. The price was a steal, honestly, way lower than it should have been. The real estate agent said the previous owners were in a hurry to sell, a family emergency back east or something. We didn't think much of it at the time. You hear that stuff all the time. We were just thrilled. The house was perfect for us, and it had this beautiful, sturdy chicken coop out back, like really well built. Not some flimsy prefab thing. It was made from thick cedar planks with a proper roof and a heavy-duty wire run. We thought, great, we can get some chickens, have fresh eggs, make it a real hobby. The first year was mostly quiet. I mean, it was the woods, so there were sounds. But these were different. It started a few months after we moved in. We'd be sitting on the porch in the evening, and we'd hear these whoops, not like an owl. Owls have that soft, questioning hoot. This was a long, drawn-out sound, almost like a yell, but not human. It would start low and then rise in pitch and just hang in the air for what felt like forever, before it faded. It came from deep in the trees, and then there were the knocks. Hollow knocks, like someone was hitting a dead tree with a big stick. Thump, thump, thump. It didn't sound random. It had a rhythm to it. We'd look at each other and I'd say, "Elk, maybe?" And she'd nod. But we both knew elk don't sound like that. We'd read online about elk bugling and it wasn't that. This was something else. We dismissed it. You do that, you know. You explain it away. It's the wind. It's a weird bird. It's your imagination. You don't want to think about the other possibilities. We finally got our chickens in the spring, a dozen of them. It was nice, a little routine. I'd go out in the morning with my coffee, let them out, check for eggs. It was peaceful. Then one morning I went out and the whole world felt wrong. The air was too still. The run was attached to the side of the coop, fenced in with this strong 1x2-inch wire mesh, stapled and nailed to 4x4 posts. That morning, a whole section of it, about 6 feet wide, was just peeled back, not cut, not broken. It was like something had grabbed the top edge and just peeled it upwards and outwards, bending the metal back on itself. The staples were ripped right out of the wood. The force it would have taken, it was immense. The ground was all torn up, muddy footprints everywhere. but they were just a mess. Couldn't make out a shape. All the chickens were gone. Not a feather left, just gone. We were sick about it. We thought maybe a bear. We called a local contractor to come look at reinforcing everything, maybe putting in an electric fence. This guy, he was a local, been in the area his whole life. He looked at the bent fencing, running his hand over the twisted metal. He got real quiet. He didn't look at me when he spoke. He said, "Our storm didn't do this." I said, "We didn't have a storm last night." He just shook his head and said, "No. I mean, an animal didn't do this like a bear would. A bear would claw at it, try to go through it. This was pulled." Then he looked right at me and his eyes were dead serious. Folks who lived here before, they had some troubles, sold in a hurry. And that was it. He wouldn't say any more, but it echoed everything we'd been feeling in the pit of our stomachs. That low-grade dread that we'd been ignoring for a year. We were shaken, but we're stubborn. We decided to just tear the coop down later, not bother with more chickens. We just left it for a few days, empty and sad-looking. The sounds from the woods got more frequent after that. The whoops sounded closer sometimes. The knocks would answer each other from different parts of the forest. It felt like a conversation we weren't meant to understand. The night it happened, we'd gone into the little town about 20 minutes away for dinner. It was a way to try and feel normal again. We had a nice meal, a couple of drinks, talked about everything except the coop and the woods. It was a good distraction. It was fully dark by the time we started heading back, maybe around 9 o'clock. The drive up to our house is a long gravel driveway, maybe a quarter mile, winding through trees before it opens up to the clearing where the house sits. It's pitch black out there, no streetlights. Your headlights are the only thing cutting through the dark. I had the high beams on, cutting 2 bright tunnels through the night. We were chatting, still in that good mood from dinner, when the headlights swept across the backyard and lit up the chicken coop. We both saw it at the same time, and the conversation just died. Both of the coop's main doors, these heavy framed cedar doors, were wide open, just yawning open into the blackness inside. They hadn't been like that when we left. I remember my stomach just dropping. A cold feeling washed over me, right from the top of my head down to my feet. My wife said my name, just a whisper. "John." I slowed the car to a crawl, my foot heavy on the brake. "Maybe it was the wind," I said, but my voice sounded thin and weak, even to me. There was no wind. The air was perfectly still. I stopped the car about 50 feet from the coop, the engine idling, the high beams flooding the little building with a harsh, white light. The open doors looked like a scream. I put the car in park. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I had this stupid automatic thought that I should go check it out. I undid my seatbelt. The click was incredibly loud in the quiet car. My wife's hand shot out and grabbed my arm. Her fingers were like ice. "Don't," she breathed. Her eyes were huge, reflecting the dashboard lights. I was just about to say something, to tell her it was probably nothing, that I'd just take a quick look. When it happened, it was so fast. But every detail is burned into my brain like a brand. The 2 doors, the ones that were hanging open, they didn't just swing, they exploded outward. There was a sound, this huge splintering crack, and then both doors were just gone, smashed into pieces, and coming through the doorway where the doors had been were 2 figures. They were enormous, I mean, just massive. They had to duck to get through the 7-foot doorway, and even then, their shoulders hit the frame and splintered it more. They were covered in hair, but it wasn't like a bear's fur. It was long and shaggy, a dark brown, almost black color, and it looked matted in places. They were upright, on 2 legs, but they were built. Thick, powerful shoulders, massive chests. Their arms were long, hanging down past their knees. They burst out into the light of the high beams, and for one single frozen second, they stopped. They were caught fully in the glare. It was like the world just stopped turning. The one on the right was slightly bigger. It turned its head toward the car, and I saw its face. I didn't see eyes, not clearly, because it threw up a long, thick arm to shield its face from the blinding light. but I saw the profile, a heavy brow, a flattened nose. It wasn't a bear. A bear's face is all snout. This was different. It was primitive, powerful. The other one did the same, ducking its head behind its arm. The smell hit us a second later, even through the closed car windows. It was a wave of it, a mix of wet dog and rotten meat and something else, something musky and foul like a swamp. It was overwhelming. Then they moved. They didn't run like a man, and they didn't lope like a gorilla. It was this incredible, powerful, bounding motion. They went from a standstill to a full sprint in one step. They were so fast, unnaturally fast. They tore across the backyard, covering ground in huge, leaping strides, and vanished into the tree line in less than 2 seconds. The sound wasn't footsteps. It was like heavy, wet thuds, and then the crash of undergrowth as they disappeared. And then silence. Absolute, deafening silence. The car was still running. The high beams were still shining on the wrecked coupe, on the shattered doors lying in the gravel. Pieces of splintered cedar were scattered everywhere. The frame of the doorway was just gone, smashed to pieces. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just sat there, my hands locked on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I could feel a tremor starting deep inside me. My wife's hand was still on my arm, her grip so tight it hurt. She wasn't making a sound. I finally managed to turn my head to look at her. She was staring straight ahead at the empty, dark hole where the coupe doors used to be. Her face was white as a sheet. She was gripping the dashboard with her other hand. Her fingers pressed so hard they were bloodless. We sat there for what felt like an hour. It was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. Neither of us said a word. What was there to say? We had both seen it. There was no explaining it away, no weird bear, no escaped gorilla. We knew in that single horrifying moment exactly what they were. The word was just there, in my head, filling up all the space. Bigfoot. The reality of it was a physical weight on my chest. The sheer size of them, the power it took to smash through solid cedar planks like they were balsa wood. My mind was just broken. It was trying to find a box to put what I'd just seen in, and there wasn't one. It didn't fit. It refused to fit into my educated, retired engineer world. This wasn't a shadow or a sound. This was flesh and blood and immense, terrifying reality, standing right there in my headlights. I finally put the car in reverse and backed all the way down the driveway, my eyes glued to the tree line. I didn't turn the car around until we were on the main road. We drove to a well-lit truck stop 20 miles away and just sat in the parking lot until the sun came up. We didn't sleep. We barely spoke. The next morning, in the daylight, we went back. The destruction was even more shocking in the sun. The coupe was totaled. We called the same contractor. He came out, took one look at the splintered frame and the doors smashed to kindling, and just nodded slowly. He didn't seem surprised. He said, "Yeah, that's them." He told us in a low voice that a few other folks in the deeper parts of the valley had seen things, had similar damage. No one talked about it much. He brought his crew over that afternoon, and they demolished the coupe completely, hauled every piece of it away. For months after that, the sounds continued, the whoops, the knocks. Sometimes they felt closer to the house than ever before. We stopped going outside after dark. We kept all the outside lights on all night. We were prisoners in our own perfect home. We talked about selling, but where would we go? And how could we explain why? We're moving because Bigfoot destroyed our chicken coop. It sounds insane. Eventually, after about 6 months, the sounds just stopped. The woods went quiet. We still don't go walking in them. I look out the window at the tree line every night before I go to bed. The house is still perfect. We're still here. But that night, I see it every time I close my eyes, the way they burst out of the darkness into the light. The sheer, raw power of them, the way they moved, the smell, the terror that froze me solid. It's a memory that doesn't feel like a memory. It feels like a piece of some other wilder world that broke through into ours for just a few seconds, long enough to show us that we don't know anything. Not really. They were real. They were enormous, and I still have no way to explain it. Story 3. All right, so I've never really shared this with anyone outside of a couple of close friends, and even then I downplayed it because who'd believe me? But I need to get this out there. It's been eating at me for years, and maybe writing it down will help. Or maybe someone else has been through something similar. This happened back in September 2014. I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee, and I've been hiking solo since I was a teenager. I know these woods, or I thought I did. The Cherokee National Forest has always been my escape, a place where I could clear my head and just be alone with nature. But that trip, it changed everything. That day started like any other. I drove out early, parked my car at the trailhead, and loaded up my backpack. The weather was perfect, cool but not cold, with that crisp early autumn air that makes you feel alive. I'd planned a 3-day loop, nothing too strenuous, just me and the trail. I remember thinking how peaceful it was as I hiked in. The leaves were starting to turn, and the sunlight filtered through the canopy in these golden shafts that made everything feel serene. I'd done this route before, so I knew where I was headed. A secluded clearing about 5 miles in that I'd used before for camping. It's off the main path, quiet, with a small stream nearby for water. I've always valued solitude, and this spot felt like my own little secret. I got there in the early afternoon and set up camp. I remember unpacking my tent, laying out my sleeping bag, and gathering some dry wood for a fire later. I even took a moment to just sit and listen to the birds chirping and the rustle of squirrels in the underbrush. It was so normal, so routine. I felt completely at ease, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I spent the next few hours exploring a bit, filtering water from the stream, and just enjoying the stillness. As the sun started to dip lower, I built a small fire and cooked some dinner. Just a simple dehydrated meal, but it hit the spot. I sat by the fire, sipping water and watching the flames dance, feeling that deep contentment I always get out here. But then, as dusk began to settle, something shifted. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just a gradual change that crept up on me. The birds stopped singing, like all at once. 1 minute, the forest was alive with noise, and the next, it was dead quiet. I've been in woods when they go silent before, usually when a predator is around, like a bear or something. But this felt different. It wasn't just quiet, it was unnaturally still, like the air itself had thickened. I felt this creeping unease wash over me, a prickling on the back of my neck that I couldn't shake. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was just spooking myself because I was alone. But my gut was screaming at me that something was wrong. I decided to douse the fire early. I usually keep it going for a while after dark, but that night, I didn't want the light or the smell drawing attention. I poured water over the embers, listening to the hiss and steam, and the silence around me felt heavy, oppressive. I climbed into my tent and zipped it up, trying to push down the fear. I lay there in my sleeping bag, listening, but there was nothing. No wind, no animals, just this profound silence that made my ears ring. I must have drifted off eventually because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a sound. It was around midnight. I know because I glanced at my watch and the glow in the dark hands showed just past 12. The sound was a heavy branch snap, like something big had stepped on it. Not a small twig, but a thick branch that cracked loud enough to echo in the stillness. My heart immediately started pounding and I froze, straining to hear more. Then came another snap, closer this time, maybe 30 yards away. I held my breath, my mind racing through possibilities. A bear maybe, or a deer. But deer don't snap branches like that. They're lighter on their feet. This sounded heavy, deliberate. I stayed still for what felt like forever, just listening. Then I heard it again, another branch snap even closer. And that's when the whispering started. At first I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind. It was a low, hushed sound. And it took me a second to realize it was saying my name, Evan. Just like that, in this flat, emotionless whisper that didn't sound human. It was like someone was mimicking my name, but without any feeling behind it. My blood ran cold. I mean, I was alone out there. Who the hell could be saying my name? I'd told no one where I was camping exactly, and even if I had, no one would be out here in the middle of the night messing with me. I stayed curled up in my tent, too scared to move. The whispering came again, a little louder this time. Evan. It was coming from the darkness right outside my tent. I could hear breathing now, too. Deep, ragged breaths that sounded too big for a person. My hands were shaking and I felt sweat trickling down my back despite the cool air. I remember thinking, this isn't happening. This can't be real. But it was. I slowly, carefully unzipped the tent flap just a crack to peer out. The moon was out, casting enough light to see shapes in the gloom. And that's when I saw it. A massive, upright shape moving between the trees. It was tall, way taller than a man, and broad-shouldered. It was pacing back and forth like it was patrolling the edge of my camp. I couldn't make out details, but its movements were fluid, almost graceful, but with this weight that made the ground seem to vibrate with each step. I felt this primal fear seize me, the kind that roots you to the spot. My mind was screaming Bigfoot or something, but I pushed that away. It sounded crazy even to me. Then it stopped pacing and turned toward my tent. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its attention on me, like a physical pressure. The whispering came again. Evan. And this time it was closer, right outside the tent. I scrambled back, fumbling for my flashlight, but my hands were so slick with sweat I could barely grip it. I finally got it turned on and shone it through the mesh window of my tent. That's when I saw the eyes. They were amber-colored, glowing in the beam of my light, set deep in a dark, shadowy face. They weren't reflective like an animal's. They seemed to emit their own light, and they were fixed on me. I felt a jolt of terror so intense I thought I might pass out. The creature let out this low growl that rumbled through the air, and then it took a step closer. I could smell it now, a musky, earthy scent, like wet fur and decay that made my stomach churn. I knew I had to get out of there. There was no way I was staying in that tent. I grabbed my backpack. I didn't even think about zipping it properly, and I burst out of the tent, running blindly into the forest. I didn't look back. I just ran. The moment I started moving, I heard its footsteps behind me, heavy and fast, matching my pace. It wasn't running after me like a predator chasing prey. It was keeping up with me, like it was herding me or something. I could hear its breathing, those deep, ragged breaths, and every now and then that whisper, Evan. I was sprinting through the dark, branches whipping at my face and arms, my heart hammering in my chest so hard I thought it would burst. I've never been so scared in my life. I could feel its presence right behind me, so close that the air felt thick and charged, like before a storm. At one point, I glanced over my shoulder and saw it, a huge, dark shape, moving effortlessly through the trees, its amber eyes locked on me. It was gaining on me, and I knew I couldn't outrun it. That's when it roared, not a growl, but a full-on roar that echoed through the forest, shaking the trees around me, and in the middle of that roar, it screamed my name, Evan! The sound was furious, primal, and it felt like it vibrated right through my chest, rattling my bones. I stumbled, almost falling, but I kept going, driven by pure adrenaline. I could feel the ground trembling under its footsteps, and I knew if it caught me, I was dead. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes. My lungs were burning and my legs felt like jelly. Then, through the trees, I saw a glimmer of light. It was the moon reflecting off something flat, a road. A service road, I realized, one I'd forgotten about from previous trips. I pushed myself harder, stumbling out of the woods and onto the gravel. I didn't stop to look back. I just ran along the road, following it until I saw my car in the distance, parked at the trailhead. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. I didn't even put on my seatbelt. I just slammed the car into gear and sped off, gravel flying behind me. I drove like a maniac, not caring about the speed, just wanting to put as much distance between me and that forest as possible. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until I was miles away, on the main road, and even then, I half expected to see those amber eyes staring back at me. I made it home in the early hours of the morning, still shaking, my clothes torn and dirty. I didn't sleep for days after that. A week later, I went back with a friend. I needed to know if I'd imagined it all. We found my campsite. My tent was ripped to shreds, like something had clawed through it. And all around the site, in the soft mud, were footprints, huge human-like footprints, over 17 inches long. My friend measured them. We didn't stick around long. We just took photos and got out of there. To this day, I can't explain what happened. I've never gone hiking solo again, and even being in the woods with others makes me anxious. That thing knew my name. I'm convinced it learned it from a previous trip, maybe from me talking to myself or something. But why? Why did it chase me? Why did it roar my name like that? I'll never know, and that's what haunts me the most. The fear is still there, like a shadow I can't shake, and sometimes in the dead of night, I still hear that whisper in my dreams. Story 4. We were in my old Ford Taurus, a beat-up sedan that rattled if you went over 50, but it got us where we needed to go. My sister was in the passenger seat, slumped against the window, and I was fighting to keep my eyes open. The air in the car was stuffy, so I had the window cracked a bit, letting in that cool, damp Michigan air that smells like pine and wet earth. We'd been joking around for the last half hour or so, stupid stuff to keep from nodding off, like making up stories about the people who lived out there, or pretending we were on some weird road trip. It was that kind of tired where everything feels a little surreal, and your brain is just fuzzy at the edges. I remember the road was dead quiet. No other cars, no lights except for our own headlights, cutting a path through the dark. The trees loomed up on both sides, so thick you couldn't see more than a few feet into them. It was one of those moments where you feel totally alone, but not in a peaceful way. More like the world has shrunk down to just you and the road, and everything else is waiting. My sister was half asleep, mumbling something about how we should have just crashed at a motel when I saw it. Up ahead, maybe 100 yards or so, something tall stepped out from the right side of the road. It happened so fast, but in that slow-motion way where every detail sears into your brain. This thing was huge. 7 or 8 feet tall, easy. It took 2 big steps to cross the road, and I mean big, like each stride covered a good chunk of asphalt. It wasn't running or scrambling, it moved quickly, but with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. The hair, that's what stuck with me the most. Long flowing hair that covered its whole body, brown with these silvery tips that caught the headlights in a way that made it look almost brushed, like it had been cared for. It was thick and matted in places, but it moved with this weird grace as it walked. Its arms hung down past its thighs, long and lanky, and its head was hunched down, so we couldn't see its face. No eyes, no features, just this shadowy shape under all that hair. The whole thing was silhouetted against the trees for a second before it disappeared into the woods on the left. It couldn't have been more than a couple of seconds from when it stepped out to when it was gone, but it felt like an eternity. The second it happened, my sister and I both screamed. Not a little yelp, but this full-on, gut-wrenching shout of terror that came out of nowhere. I swear, my heart just dropped into my stomach and my hands locked on the steering wheel. I didn't even think. I just slammed my foot down on the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, engine whining, and we shot past the spot where it had been. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through me, my whole body shaking, and my sister was gripping the dashboard, her knuckles white. She kept saying, "Did you see that? Did you see that?" over and over, her voice all high and shaky. I didn't answer at first because I was too busy staring into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it chasing us or something. But there was nothing back there. Just empty road and darkness. The trees swallowed everything up like it had never been there. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was it a bear? No, bears don't walk upright like that, and they sure as hell don't have hair that long and flowing. And it was too tall, too human-like in its movement, but not human at all. It moved with this confidence that was chilling, like it owned that road, and we were just intruders. The rest of the drive to my mum's house is a blur. I remember my foot never letting up on the gas, the speedometer creeping up to 70, then 80, on a road where 50 felt risky. The car was vibrating, and every shadow in the trees made me flinch. My sister was crying softly now, and I reached over to squeeze her hand, but mine was trembling so bad I could barely keep it steady. We didn't talk much, just occasional bursts of, "What was that?" or "I can't believe it." The air in the car felt heavy, charged with this raw fear that made it hard to breathe. When we finally pulled into my mom's driveway, the sky was starting to lighten a little, that faint gray before dawn. I killed the engine, and we just sat there for a minute, listening to the tick of the cooling car and our own ragged breathing. The house was dark except for a porch light my mum always left on, and it felt like a sanctuary after what we'd just been through. We stumbled out of the car, my legs wobbly, and hurried up the steps. I fumbled with the keys, my hands still shaking, and we burst inside. My mum was asleep on the couch in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, and she jerked awake when we came in. She took one look at our faces, pale, wide-eyed, probably looking like we'd seen a ghost, and she knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, her voice groggy but concerned. We both started talking at once, tripping over our words, and she had to tell us to slow down. We sat at the kitchen table under the harsh fluorescent light, and that's when we started piecing it together. My sister would say something like, "It had long arms," and I'd jump in with, "Yeah, past its thighs," and she'd nod, her eyes wide. We went back and forth like that, finishing each other's sentences, and it was the weirdest, most unsettling thing. Every detail matched up perfectly. The height, the hair, the way it walked. There was no doubt we'd seen the same thing, and that made it even scarier. It wasn't some trick of the light or our tired minds playing games. It was real, and we both knew it. I remember describing the silvery tips on the hair, how they almost glittered in the headlights, and my sister shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. She said it looked like it had been groomed, which sounds crazy, but that's what it seemed like. Not wild and matted, but almost maintained. And the way it moved, not hurried or scared, just purposeful, like it had some place to be. We kept coming back to that, how it didn't seem afraid of us or the car. If anything, it ignored us completely. My mom listened, her face growing more and more serious. She's lived in Buckley her whole life, and she's heard stories, but she never put much stock in them. After we finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said she'd heard whispers about something in the woods around County Line Road, but she always thought it was just folks exaggerating. That sent another chill down my spine. We drank some coffee trying to calm down, but I could still feel the adrenaline buzzing under my skin. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it stepping across the road, those two big strides, the hair flowing. Later that day, after the sun was fully up and we'd gotten a little sleep, my mom made some calls to neighbors and friends. One of them, an old-timer who lives a few miles down, said he'd heard from someone else about a similar sighting a week or so back, something tall and hairy seen near the same stretch of road. That just sealed it for us. Knowing we weren't the only ones made it both better and worse. Better because we weren't going crazy, but worse because it meant whatever it was still out there. I spent the rest of the day feeling jumpy. Every noise from outside made me tense up, and I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see it standing in the yard. My sister and I didn't talk about it much after that initial conversation. It was like we didn't want to give it more power by dwelling on it. But every now and then, we'd catch each other's eye, and I could see the same fear reflected back at me. Even now, all these years later, I get chills thinking about it. Sometimes we laugh about it, my sister and I, how we must have looked screaming our heads off in that old car, but it's a nervous laugh, you know, the kind that doesn't quite reach your eyes. We never saw it again, and I'm glad for that. But I still wonder what's going on out there in those woods. What was that thing? Why was it crossing the road at that hour? I'll never have answers, and that's the part that haunts me the most. It's just this unexplained thing that happened one early morning in August, and no matter how much time passes, it feels like it could have been yesterday. Story 5. It was one of those days that starts out perfectly normal, you know, the kind where you don't expect anything out of the ordinary to happen, and you're just going through the motions. This was back in 1983. I must have been in my late teens at the time, and my dad and I decided to take the motorboat out on the Great PD River in Darlington County, South Carolina. We'd done it 100 times before, fishing, messing around, just enjoying the quiet. That day, though, it turned into something I still can't wrap my head around, even all these years later. The sun was beating down, and the air was thick with that sticky humidity that makes your shirt cling to your back. I remember the smell of the river, that mix of wet mud and decaying leaves, with the occasional whiff of gasoline from the boat motor. We'd launched from a ramp near the woods, and the water was calm, barely a ripple except for the wake we were leaving behind. My dad was at the helm, steering us slowly upstream, while I sat up front with a .22 pistol I'd brought along. We weren't hunting or anything. I just liked to plink at bottles or logs in the water, something to pass the time. The sound of the gunshots echoed off the trees, sharp and sudden, but it was familiar, nothing out of place. We'd been out for maybe an hour or so, just cruising, not talking much. The riverbanks were lined with thick stands of cypress and pine, their roots digging into the muddy edges. Every now and then we'd spot a turtle sunning itself on a log, or a heron taking off in a flutter of wings. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that lulls you into thinking nothing bad could ever happen. I remember feeling the vibration of the motor through the soles of my feet, and the way the breeze picked up a bit, cooling the sweat on my face. I fired off a few more rounds at a floating branch, the bullets sending little splashes into the water. My dad chuckled and said something about me wasting ammo, but it was all in good fun. Then, as we rounded a bend in the river, something caught my eye on the bank up ahead. At first I thought it was a bear, or maybe a large deer. We'd seen those before. But as we got closer, maybe a few 100 feet away, I realized it was nothing I'd ever seen. It was squatting there, right at the water's edge, and it was huge. I'm not talking about big like a grizzly. This thing was taller and bulkier, with long arms and a sort of hunched posture. Its fur was a reddish-brown color, matted and dirty, like it had been rolling in the mud. The way it was crouched, it looked like it was drinking, or maybe just watching the water. But then it turned its head, and that's when everything froze, its eyes locked with mine. I swear, I felt this jolt go through my body, like I'd been hit by a low-voltage shock. The eyes were dark, almost black, and they had this intensity that made my stomach drop. It wasn't just looking at me, it was like it was seeing right through me, into some part of me I didn't even know was there. For a split second, everything went silent. The motor seemed to fade, the birds stopped chirping, and all I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst out. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. Then, in one fluid motion, it pushed off from the bank and dove into the water. Not a splash, not a sound. It just disappeared beneath the surface, like it had never been there at all. I let out this gasp, and my dad must have seen it too because he cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, his voice shaky. I was still staring at the spot where it had been, my hands trembling so bad I almost dropped the pistol. The chill that ran down my spine wasn't just from fear. It was this deep, primal cold that settled in my bones and made me feel like I'd just witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. We both stood there for what felt like forever, just watching the water, but there was nothing. No ripples, no bubbles, no sign that anything had ever broken the surface. After a minute or two, my dad started the motor again, but he kept it slow. "We need to go back and look," he said, and I could hear the unease in his voice. I didn't want to, honestly. Every instinct was telling me to get the hell out of there, but curiosity overrode the fear. We turned the boat around and headed back toward the bank where we'd seen it. As we got closer, the details started to sink in. The clay on the riverbank was soft and wet, and there were these smear marks where the thing had been squatting. They weren't footprints, more like drag marks, as if it had pushed off with its hands or something. The marks were deep, gouged into the mud, and they led right to the water's edge. We pulled the boat up as close as we could without grounding it, and I hopped out onto the bank. The mud squelched under my boots, and the smell of damp earth filled my nostrils. My dad stayed in the boat, keeping an eye out, while I knelt down to get a better look. The smear marks were about the width of my forearm, and they were fresh. The clay was still oozing water around the edges. I reached out and touched one, and my fingers came away cold and gritty. There were no tracks leading away, no broken branches or disturbed foliage. It was like the thing had vanished into thin air or into the water and left no trail behind. I scanned the trees, half expecting to see it lurking in the shadows, but there was nothing, just the quiet rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My skin was crawling, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see those dark eyes staring back at me. My dad called out, "See anything?" And I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. I got back in the boat, and we sat there for a while, just staring at the bank. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the water, and the air was getting cooler. I remember shivering, even though it wasn't that cold. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Was it a bear? No, bears don't move like that, and they don't have that kind of gaze. This was different, something wild and ancient that didn't belong in our world. Then it hit me, the .22 pistol. I'd been firing it earlier, not long before we saw the thing. Had the noise attracted it or scared it off? The thought made my stomach churn. If it was attracted, why did it run? But if it was scared, why did it lock eyes with me like that with such intensity? I mentioned it to my dad, and he just shook his head, his face pale. "I don't know, son," he said softly. "I just don't know." We decided to head back, not wanting to be out there as it got darker. The ride back was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. Every little sound, the creak of the boat, the lap of water against the hull, made me jump. I kept expecting to see that reddish-brown shape emerge from the trees or rise up out of the water, but it never did. By the time we got to the ramp, the sky was turning orange and purple, and the mosquitoes were starting to buzz around us. We loaded the boat onto the trailer in silence, the whole thing feeling surreal, like we'd stepped into someone else's nightmare. On the drive home, neither of us said much. I remember staring out the window, watching the trees blur past, and feeling this heavy weight in my chest. That gaze, those eyes, they were burned into my memory, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw them again. We never talked about it much after that day. My dad passed away a few years back, and I never brought it up with anyone else. Who would believe me? Even now, typing this out, my hands are a little shaky. I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times, trying to find some logical explanation, but there isn't one. All I have are those smear marks in the clay, and the memory of that intense, chilling stare, and the question that still haunts me. Did my shooting bring it to us, or send it running? I'll probably never know, but sometimes when I'm out on the water, I catch myself scanning the banks, half expecting to see it again, and that cold fear washes over me all over again. Story 6. Okay, I'll try to write this out the way it happened. I don't talk about it much, because honestly, who would believe me? But it's one of those things that just sits with you, you know? It pops into your head at random times, usually when it's dark and quiet, and the feeling comes right back, that cold, solid fear. This was years ago now, but it feels like it happened last week. It was a Saturday in late September. I remember that because the leaves had just started to turn. There was that crispness in the air, the kind that makes you want to be outside all day. Me and my friend, we were both in our early 20s, and we'd driven out to this area in Pennsylvania he knew about. It was kind of our spot. We'd go there to just get away from everything, have a few beers, and talk about nothing important. The place was basically a wide, cleared right-of-way for a huge gas pipeline that cut through the woods. It was like a giant grassy scar running over the hills. On either side of this clearing, the woods were thick and dark, even in the daytime. We were sitting right on the pipeline itself, on one of the big metal valves or something. I don't know what it's called. It was just a good place to sit. We'd been there for maybe an hour, just shooting the breeze, watching the clouds, not a care in the world. That's when the sounds started. At first, it was easy to ignore. You hear all sorts of things in the woods. But this was different. It started with this weird, loud call. The best way I can describe it is like a huge bird, but not any bird I'd ever heard. It was deep, with a weird, warbling echo to it. It didn't sound natural, not for Pennsylvania anyway. It came from the woods to our left, down the hill a bit. We both stopped talking and just listened. My friend gave me a look like, "You hearing this?" I just nodded. Then, a few seconds after the call stopped, we heard a knock. A single, solid thwack on wood. It wasn't a branch falling. It was too clean, too purposeful. It sounded like someone had taken a big piece of lumber and smacked it against a tree trunk. The sound carried right through the quiet. We didn't say anything. We just sat there, frozen, listening. The bird-like call came again from the same general area. It was a little louder this time. Then, after a pause, another wood knock answered it. But this one came from further to the right, higher up the hill. It was like they were talking to each other. A call from the left, a knock from the right, back and forth. My heart was starting to beat a little faster. This wasn't right. Animals don't do that. Hunters might use calls, but not like this. This felt like a conversation, a creepy alien conversation happening in the woods around us. The sounds kept going back and forth for what felt like forever. I looked at my watch at one point, and from the first sound to when we finally saw it, it was about 20 minutes. 20 minutes of this unnerving, escalating back and forth. With each exchange, the sounds got louder, more aggressive. The bird call became less like a bird and more like a shriek, and the knocks were so hard I could almost feel the vibration in the air. The feeling in my gut went from curiosity to a low-grade anxiety, and then to full-blown dread. The woods, which had felt so peaceful before, now felt like they were closing in. Every shadow between the trees felt like it was moving. The hair on my arms was standing up. My friend's face had gone pale. He mouthed the word, "What is that?" I just shook my head. I had no idea. My mind was racing through possibilities. Was it some kids messing with us? But we were miles from any house. Was it some kind of weird machinery? It didn't sound mechanical at all. It sounded organic, living. The last bird call was so loud and sharp, it made us both flinch. It was right there. I mean, it couldn't have been more than 100 feet away, just inside the tree line down the hill. The silence that followed was even worse. It was a heavy, waiting silence. The woods had gone completely dead quiet. No squirrels chattering, no birds, nothing. It was like everything else was hiding. That's when we both at the exact same time decided we needed to see. We had to know what was making that noise. It was a stupid, stupid idea, but the curiosity mixed with the fear was like a physical force pushing us up. We slowly stood up from the pipeline, our muscles stiff and tense. We were facing the tree line, staring into the wall of leaves and shadows. For a second, nothing, just the stillness. Then something moved. It wasn't a deer. It was too big and it moved wrong. It stepped out from behind a thick oak tree and my brain just broke. I couldn't process it at first. It was tall, so damn tall. It had to be 7 feet, maybe more. It was covered in this shaggy, matted hair that was a dirty grey colour, like an old rug left out in the weather. Its arms were ridiculously long, hanging down past its knees. They were thick like a man's legs. But the worst part was its face. It turned and looked right at us. It wasn't a bear's face. It wasn't a man's face. It was something in between, and it was all wrong. The eyes were dark and set deep under a heavy brow. There was no white to them, just dark pits. It had a flat nose and a wide mouth. It wasn't snarling or anything. It just looked at us. It was a look of, I don't know, assessment, curiosity. It wasn't rage, but there was an intelligence there that was absolutely terrifying. It wasn't the blank stare of an animal. It was aware. It knew we were there, and it knew we were seeing it. That moment, that mutual stare, lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like an hour. I felt every single one of my instincts scream at once. Every cell in my body was firing a single unified signal: run! I didn't even have to look at my friend. I heard his sharp intake of breath, a choked sound that wasn't a word, and then we were both moving. There was no let's go, no discussion. It was pure, unthinking panic. We spun around and just ran. I don't think I've ever moved that fast in my life. My legs were pumping. My heart was hammering in my throat so hard I couldn't breathe. And then we heard it. As we were bolting across the open right-of-way, heading for my car, which was parked on a dirt track a couple 100 yards away, the thing ran too. The sound was unbelievable. It wasn't the quiet, graceful movement of a deer. This was a crash. A violent, explosive crashing through the woods. It was like listening to a car drive through a forest. We could hear branches snapping, saplings being shoved aside and just breaking, the thud of its feet hitting the ground. It was heavy, so damn heavy. I risked a glance over my shoulder, my body still moving forward at a full sprint. I shouldn't have looked. It was running parallel to us, maybe 50 yards away, just inside the tree line. It was moving up the hill, toward the road, and it was fast, unnaturally fast for something that size. Its long arms were pumping, and its whole body was a blur of grey fur and raw power. And then it did the thing that sealed this memory into a permanent nightmare. As it ran, it turned its head and glanced back at us. It wasn't a full look, just a quick, over-the-shoulder glance. Its dark eyes met mine for a split second, and then it faced forward again and kept running, crashing through everything in its path. That glance, it was so casual. We were running for our lives, pure terror. And it looked back at us like we were just a minor curiosity it was leaving behind. The sheer, effortless power of it, the speed, and that quick, intelligent look, it shattered any last hope that this was just a bear or some trick of the light. We didn't stop running until we got to the car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the door. We scrambled inside, slammed the doors, and I turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed it into drive, spinning the tires and spraying gravel everywhere. I didn't care. I just had to get out of there. We drove in silence for 10 minutes, both of us just breathing heavy, staring straight ahead. Finally, my friend spoke, his voice shaky. "What the hell was that?" I just shook my head. I didn't have an answer. I still don't. We never went back to that spot. We talked about it a few times in the weeks after, but it was too weird, too frightening. We eventually just stopped bringing it up. It was easier to try and forget, but you never really forget. Years later, I was on a trip to Niagara Falls with my family. We went to one of those wax museums. You know, the cheesy ones with famous people and monsters. We turned a corner, and there it was, a Bigfoot display. It was posed all dramatic, roaring with these exaggerated fangs and bright yellow eyes, and I just stopped dead. My wife asked me what was wrong, and I couldn't even speak. It was wrong, of course. The wax model was all Hollywood, too muscular, too aggressive looking. The face was all wrong, but the size, the general shape, the shaggy hair. It was close enough. It was like a cheap cartoon version of the thing I saw. Staring at that stupid wax figure, the whole memory came flooding back with such force I felt dizzy. The sounds, the look it gave us, the sound of it crashing through the woods. The fear was right there again, fresh and cold. I had to walk away. I told my wife I felt sick, which wasn't a lie. That's it. That's what happened. We saw something in the woods that day that I can't explain. Something big, fast and intelligent that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, when I'm trying to fall asleep, I can still hear the crashing sounds, and I can still see its face as it turned to look at me. Just for a second, just a glance, and I still don't know what it was. Story 7. It was one of those perfect September mornings in northern Minnesota, the kind where the air feels clean and cold in your lungs, but the sun on your face promises to warm things up later. I'd gotten up before dawn, loaded my four-wheeler onto the trailer, and driven out to my usual spot. It's an old network of logging roads that's been mostly reclaimed by the woods, a place I've been coming to for over 10 years to just get away. That day, I was on a trail called the Old Pine Cut. It's a narrow track, canopied over by tall white pines. So even at midday, it feels a little like twilight. The ground was soft with a million years of fallen needles. I remember the smell so clearly, that damp, earthy scent of pine and decay, mixed with the sharp tang of gasoline from my machine. I was just puttering along, not in any hurry, maybe going 15, 20 miles an hour. The ATV's engine was a steady, familiar roar in my ears, a sound that usually just fades into the background. I was watching the sunlight cut through the trees in long, dusty shafts, thinking about absolutely nothing, just enjoying the ride. I came around a gentle bend where a giant birch had fallen a long time ago. Its white bark was peeling and grey with moss. And that's when I saw it. About 100 yards ahead, something stepped out of the trees on the right-hand side of the road. My first thought, the one that flashes through your brain before anything else, was moose. We get a lot of them up here, and they're huge, dark, and can stop your heart if you come up on one suddenly. But this was wrong. The shape was all wrong. A moose is lanky, with those long, spindly legs and a weird, horsey face. This thing was solid, thick. It didn't amble out like a moose. It took two long, purposeful strides from the edge of the pines right into the center of the logging road. And then it stopped. It was facing away from me, standing on two legs. It had to be 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Its entire body was covered in this shaggy, dark brown hair, almost black in the deep shadows of the trees. The hair was long, like an old, unkempt bison, and it matted around its massive shoulders. It was just standing there, completely still, in the middle of the road. My brain was screaming at me, trying to find a box to put this thing in. A bear walking on its hind legs, but I've seen that before, and it's clumsy, comical almost. They wobble, their back slopes. This thing was upright, powerfully built, like a weightlifter. The proportions were humanoid, but scaled up, thicker, more powerful than any man could ever be. It was just wrong. It was a shape that shouldn't exist in these woods. I slammed on the brakes. The ATV skidded a little on the soft ground, the engine coughing and then settling into a ragged idle. The sudden quiet was deafening. All I could hear was the tick-tick-tick of my engine cooling down and the blood pounding in my ears. I didn't know what to do. My hands were locked on the handlebars, my knuckles white. I was frozen. I think a part of me was still hoping it would drop to all fours and lope off into the woods, that my eyes were playing a trick, that the morning shadows were creating a monster out of a stump and some moss. But it wasn't. It was real. And then it started to turn. It didn't jerk its head around. It turned its whole upper body, slowly, deliberately, like it had known I was there the whole time. Like it was just now deciding to acknowledge me. That's when the terror truly set in. Not the startled jump scare kind, but a deep, cold, sinking feeling that started in my gut and spread out to my fingers and toes, turning them to ice. This was the moment it locked eyes with me. Its face. It wasn't an ape's face. It wasn't a bear's face. It was something else entirely. The hair on its face was shorter, tighter to the skin, and it was a lighter brown, almost reddish around the mouth and eyes. And the eyes, they were the worst part. They were a deep, dark brown. But they weren't dumb animal eyes. They were intelligent. They were focused. They were looking right at me, right into me. There was no aggression in that look, not at first. It was more like a cold, calculating curiosity. It was studying me. I felt like a bug under a microscope. Time just stopped. I couldn't have looked away if I tried. My whole world shrunk down to those two dark eyes and the 25 yards of dirt road between us. I could feel every single beat of my heart hammering against my ribs. My mouth was so dry I couldn't have swallowed if I'd tried. I wasn't even breathing. I was just waiting. It was holding something in its left hand. I couldn't make out what it was. Just a dark, lumpy shape. It clutched it against its thigh, its fingers, long, thick fingers, I could see them even from that distance, curled around it. We stayed like that for what felt like an hour. It was probably only 5 or 6 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. I was completely at its mercy. If it had decided to charge, there was nothing I could have done. I was just sitting on this stupid four-wheeler, a stupid helmet on my head, feeling more exposed and vulnerable than I ever have in my entire life. Then it moved. It didn't make a sound, not a grunt, not a sniff, not a rustle of leaves. The silence was unnerving. In the woods, everything makes noise. A squirrel chatters, a bird flutters, a branch cracks. This thing moved with an impossible quiet. It took one last long look at me, then it turned its head forward, and with that same deliberate, powerful stride, it walked across the rest of the road. I watched its back as it moved. The muscles in its shoulders and back rippled under that thick coat of hair. It was so real, so physical, so there. It reached the other side of the road, and without even breaking stride, it stepped over a fallen log. A log that would have come up to my waist, like it was nothing. It was just a step, and then it was gone. It just melted into the thick underbrush of the pine forest. 1 second it was there, a massive, impossible silhouette against the green, and the next, it had vanished. There was no sound of it crashing away, no snapped branches, no rustling leaves. It was just gone. The woods were silent again. I don't know how long I sat there. The engine was still idling, that low, rumbling vibration, the only thing that felt real. I was shaking all over, a fine, uncontrollable tremor that started deep inside my muscles. I finally managed to tear my eyes away from the spot where it had disappeared and look down at my hands. They were still gripping the handlebars so tight my fingers ached. I had to get out of there. I fumbled for the gear shift, my hand clumsy and numb. I twisted the throttle, and the ATV lurched forward. I didn't look back. I just focused on the trail ahead, my eyes scanning the woods on either side, expecting to see it again, expecting it to be following me. Every shadow was a threat, every tree stump was a crouching form. I rode faster than I should have, the ATV bouncing over roots and ruts, the branches whipping at my arms. I didn't care. I just had to get back to my truck, to the road, to something that felt normal. The whole ride back, my heart was stuck in my throat. That image was burned into my brain. The dark, hairy body, the slow turn, and those intelligent, piercing eyes looking right through me. I finally skidded to a stop at my truck, the tires throwing up a spray of gravel. I killed the engine and the silence rushed in again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of an empty parking area, of a normal world. I ripped my helmet off and just sat there for a few minutes, breathing hard, trying to get my shaking under control. I loaded the four-wheeler onto the trailer with hands that still wouldn't stop trembling. I kept looking over my shoulder, back towards the dark line of the forest. I felt like I was being watched. The whole drive home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a dark, tall shape running behind my truck. I've never told anyone this story. Not my buddies I ride with, not my family. What would I even say? Hey, I saw Bigfoot on the old pine cut. They'd laugh, or worse, think I'd lost my mind, and a part of me wonders if I did. But I know what I saw. I know the way my body reacted, the pure, primal fear that seized me. That wasn't a hallucination, that was real. I haven't been back to that particular trail since. I still ride my ATV, but I stick to the more open, well-traveled paths now. I'm always on edge, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line. I guess I'm always looking for it, or more accurately, I'm always afraid of seeing it again. That feeling of being watched, studied by something that shouldn't exist, has never really left me. It's been over a year now, and sometimes I'll just be sitting in my living room, and the memory of those eyes will hit me out of nowhere, and the chill will come right back, as fresh and as cold as it was that morning on the logging road. I saw something in those woods that I can't explain. Something that looked back at me with an intelligence I still don't understand, and I don't think I ever will. Story 8. The night had been perfectly normal up until it wasn't. The air was cool, that crisp autumn chill that makes you roll up the windows just enough. The woods around us were this big black wall, and the only light came from the dashboard, casting a soft green glow on our faces. We'd been there for maybe an hour, just shooting the breeze about nothing important. Football, girls, what we were going to do after graduation. The kind of talk that feels so heavy when you're that age, and so pointless later on. The radio was playing some old Creedence song, and I remember tapping my fingers on the door panel, feeling the vibration of the music through the cheap metal. Then the car dipped. It was a small thing at first, just a slight tilt backwards, like when someone leans on the trunk. I stopped talking mid-sentence and looked at my friend. He was in the driver's seat, and he felt it too. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. "What was that?" he asked, his voice low. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe a deer brushed against it?" We both sat there, not moving, just listening. The Creedence song ended, and the radio switched to some DJ talking softly. The woods were dead quiet, not a normal quiet, but a thick, heavy silence, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I remember feeling the hairs on my arms stand up. It was a primal thing, a deep-down feeling that something was off. You know that feeling? When your gut just knots up for no reason, you can see. Then it happened again. This time, the back of the car lifted. Not a lot, just a few inches, but enough that the front tires felt light on the ground. It wasn't a jerk, it was a smooth, powerful motion. My heart just dropped into my stomach. My friend grabbed the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. "What the hell?" he whispered, and his voice was tight with a fear I'd never heard in him before. Before either of us could say another word, the car was shoved forward. It wasn't a gentle push, it was a hard, deliberate shove from behind. The engine was off, so the car just lurched ahead a good 3 or 4 feet, the tires crunching on the gravel and dirt. The movement was so violent, my head snapped back and then forward. My friend let out a short, sharp yell and slammed his foot on the brake pedal, which did absolutely nothing since the car wasn't running. We just sort of shuddered to a stop. We were both breathing hard, panting like we'd just run a mile. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure panic. I twisted in my seat, craning my neck to look out the back window. It was pitch black. The dome light wasn't on, and the moon was hidden behind clouds. I couldn't see a damn thing. "Start the car," I said, my voice shaking. "Start the car now." He fumbled for the keys, his hands trembling so bad he dropped them on the floor. He cursed, bending down to feel around in the dark by his feet. That's when the shaking started. It began as a gentle rocking back and forth. Then it got stronger. It felt like being in one of those coin-operated vibrating beds, but 100 times more powerful. The whole car was rattling, a deafening noise of metal groaning and glass vibrating in its frames. I was thrown against the passenger door, my shoulder hitting the window hard. My friend was being tossed around in his seat, one hand still scrambling for the keys on the floor. The force was immense. It wasn't like a person shaking a car. It felt like the earth itself was moving. The seats were bucking, the rearview mirror was swinging wildly, and a can of soda we had in the back seat flew forward and hit the dashboard. I remember grabbing the "oh shit" handle above my door, my fingers clamping down so hard they ached. I was terrified the car was just going to come apart around us, and then, through the shaking, I heard it, a sound I will never ever forget. It wasn't a roar, it was lower than that. A deep, guttural, chuffing noise, like the worst cough you've ever heard, mixed with a growl from the bottom of a well. It was coming from right outside, and it vibrated through the metal of the car, right into my bones. It was a sound of pure, raw strength. It wasn't an animal I knew. It wasn't a bear. It was something else. My friend finally found the keys. His hand was shaking so violently he could barely get them into the ignition. The car was still being shaken, a violent, jarring motion that made his aim terrible. The key scraped against the metal before he finally jammed it home. He turned it. The engine cranked once, twice, agonizingly slow sounds, and then roared to life. The headlights blasted on, illuminating the dirt road in front of us. For a split second, the shaking stopped. The sudden silence was almost as terrifying as the noise. We both froze, staring straight ahead into the twin beams of light, not daring to look back. That's when the car lifted. The back end just came up. It wasn't a tilt anymore. The whole rear of the car, the back wheels, everything, just rose into the air. The front of the car dipped down and the headlights pointed at the ground, casting crazy, leaping shadows. We were pitched forward in our seats, the seatbelts digging into our shoulders. I was staring at the roof of the car, my mind screaming that this was impossible. This was a 3,000-pound car. Nothing could just pick it up. I was pressed back into my seat as the car teetered there, balanced on its front wheels. I could hear the engine whining, a high-pitched, desperate sound. I could feel the strain on the chassis, a metallic groaning that sounded like the car was about to snap in half. My friend had both hands on the wheel, his foot stomping on the gas pedal, but the rear tires were just spinning in the air, whining uselessly. I couldn't help it. I had to look. I forced my head to turn, my neck cracking with the effort, and I looked out the back window, and I saw it. The headlights from the front were reflecting off the dusty rear window, but I could see past the glare. I could see a shape, a massive, dark shape hunched over behind the car. It was huge, wider than any man, and covered in what looked like wet, matted hair, dark brown or black. It was holding our car up. Its arms, they were long, too long and thick as tree trunks, were wrapped under the rear bumper, its shoulders bunched with impossible muscle. But it was the face I saw for just a fraction of a second that is burned into my brain. It wasn't a bear's face. It was flatter, with a heavy brow ridge, and in the refracted dirty light I saw one eye. It was a deep, intelligent and utterly furious eye, reflecting the light back at me with a red-orange glow. It wasn't the mindless gaze of an animal. It was a look of pure, focused intent. Then it dropped us. The car slammed back down onto all four tires with a jarring, bone-shaking crash. The impact threw me forward and then back. My teeth clacked together and I bit my tongue, the coppery taste of blood filling my mouth. The second we hit the ground, my friend didn't hesitate. He screamed, a raw, wordless sound of terror, and he slammed the gear shift into drive and stomped the gas pedal to the floor. The Nova's tires screamed, spinning wildly for a moment before they caught on the gravel and dirt. The car shot forward like a bullet. Gravel sprayed out behind us, pinging against the undercarriage. I was thrown back into my seat by the acceleration, my head spinning. I was still facing the back, and as we sped away, the headlights sweeping across the road behind us, I saw it one more time. It was standing there, in the middle of the road where we'd been parked. It was standing on two legs, fully upright, and it was huge. I'm not good with judging height, but I swear to God it had to be 9 feet tall, maybe more. It was just a massive black silhouette against the darker black of the woods, and it was watching us go. It didn't chase us, it just stood there, and the sheer size of it, the way it just dominated that space, made my blood run cold. We didn't slow down. We flew down that dirt road, the car bouncing and swerving. My friend gripping the wheel so tight, I thought he'd break it. Neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the roar of the engine, the frantic wipers swiping at nothing because it wasn't raining, and our own ragged, sobbing breaths. I kept looking back, expecting to see it running after us, keeping pace with the car, but the road behind us was empty and dark. We hit the paved road, and he didn't even slow for the stop sign. Just blasted through it, the tires squealing as we turned towards town. The lights from the houses we passed felt alien and wrong. The normal world was still here, people asleep in their beds, and we were coming from a place that wasn't normal at all. He dropped me off at my house. He didn't even turn off the engine. He just looked at me, his face pale and slick with sweat, his eyes wide and unblinking. I got out, my legs so weak I almost fell on the pavement. I slammed the door and he sped off, disappearing down the street. I stumbled into my house. The kitchen light was on. My mom was sitting at the table having a cup of tea, waiting up for me. She took one look at me and stood up, her chair scraping loudly on the floor. "My God," she said, "what's wrong? You're white as a ghost." I just stood there, shaking all over. I could still feel the vibrations in my teeth. I could still smell the fear, a sharp, sour smell that was my own. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out at first. I just pointed a trembling finger towards the door, towards the direction of Henry's knob. Finally, the words tumbled out, a jumbled, hysterical mess. There was this thing in the woods. It picked up the car. It shook us. It was huge, Mom, huge. It had to be 9 feet tall. It was covered in hair. It lifted the car right off the ground. I was crying then. Hot, shameful tears of pure relief and residual terror. I described the arms, the eye, the way it stood there watching us flee. I told her everything I'm telling you now. She listened, her hand over her mouth, her own eyes wide with disbelief and horror. I never went back to that spot. My friend sold his Nova a week later. We never really talked about it again, not in any detail. It was too big, too strange. What do you even say? We just knew. We both knew what we saw, what we felt. It's been decades. I've lived a whole life since then. But sometimes, on a quiet autumn night, when the air gets that certain chill, I'll wake up from a dead sleep, my heart pounding, the memory of that guttural, chuffing sound echoing in my ears, and the feeling of the car lifting into the air, completely helpless. I saw something out there that shouldn't exist, and it saw me. Story 9. All right, I'll just get right into it. I've been turning this over in my head for years, and I guess typing it out might help, or maybe it'll just make me relive the whole damn thing. I don't know, but here goes. This was back in 2011. I was living up in Michigan at the time, and I'd gotten into turkey hunting a few years before. It was my way of getting out, just me and the woods. I liked the quiet, the focus. That morning, I was headed out to a spot I'd scouted a few weeks prior, roughly 10 miles north of Otter Lake, right off M22. It's a beautiful area usually, thick woods, rolling hills, the kind of place that feels a million miles from everything. I remember the morning started out perfect. It was cool but not cold. The kind of spring morning where the air feels clean and new. I'd parked my truck on a little two-track that was more dirt than road, grabbed my gear and headed in. I was using a 12-gauge shotgun, nothing fancy, just something reliable. I had my camo on, my vest, the whole deal. I found a good spot to settle in, a little natural blind between a couple of big fallen pines and a thicket of young poplars. The sun was just starting to properly light up the forest floor, and everything felt right. I'd been sitting there for maybe an hour just listening. You get to know the sounds of the woods when you hunt. You hear the squirrels chattering, the birds calling to each other, the rustle of a deer moving through the underbrush maybe 100 yards off. It's a living, breathing thing. That morning, it was all there. Normal. I was patient, just waiting, watching a little clearing ahead of me where I figured some birds might come through. Then the first thing that felt off was the rain. It hadn't been in the forecast. The sky had been mostly clear when I set out, just a few high clouds, but it started as a light drizzle, just enough to make the leaves wet and get my jacket damp. No big deal. I pulled my hood up, but it got heavier pretty quickly. A steady, soaking rain that started to drum on the canopy above. The light under the trees got flat and grey. That's when the second thing happened. The smell hit me. It's hard to describe a smell, but I'll try because it's burned into my memory. It was overwhelming. I've come across bear before, and a bear has a strong, musky, kind of funky smell. This was worse. A lot worse. It was a thick, heavy stench that seemed to roll in with the rain. It was a mix of things, a real foul combination. The first thing that registered was just this incredible, pungent body odor, like something that had never washed, ever. Sweat and grime and just filth. Underneath that was the sharp, acidic smell of feces. Not like dog poop, but stronger, more wild. And then, woven through it all, was the sickly sweet smell of rotting meat. It was the kind of smell that you don't just smell with your nose, you taste it in the back of your throat. It made my stomach turn over. I actually gagged a little, and I had to swallow hard to keep from throwing up. I remember thinking, what the hell died here? But it didn't smell like a single dead animal. It smelled like a whole damn ecosystem of filth had just parked itself upwind of me. I looked around trying to see anything, but the rain and the dim light made it hard to see more than 50 feet in any direction. The smell was just everywhere, saturating the wet air, and that's when I realized the third thing. The woods had gone completely silent. I mean, dead silent. A minute ago, I could hear the rain pattering on leaves, the drip, drip, drip from the branches. I could hear birds. Now, there was nothing. The rain was still falling, but it was like the sound was being swallowed. The birds had stopped. The squirrels had vanished. It was an unnatural quiet, the kind that presses in on your eardrums. It was louder than any noise. My own breathing suddenly sounded way too loud. My heart was starting to thump in my chest, a heavy, slow beat. I was still sitting, frozen, trying to process this, the smell, the silence. It felt wrong, deep in your guts wrong. I've been spooked in the woods before, a snapped branch that turns out to be a deer, a weird shadow. This was different. This was a primal feeling, something old and scared waking up in the back of my brain. Then I heard the first branch snap. It wasn't a small dry twig. It was a proper branch, thick. It cracked with this deep, wet snap that cut through the silence like a gunshot. It came from my left, maybe 60, 70 yards away, deeper in the thick timber. My head whipped around, but I couldn't see anything through the wall of wet tree trunks and rain. My body went rigid. I wasn't hunting anymore. I was just waiting. I remember my hands were clenched so tight around my shotgun that my knuckles were white. The cold, wet metal of the gun was the only thing that felt real. Then came the footsteps. Thump, thump. They were heavy, so damn heavy. Each step had a weight to it that I could feel through the ground. It wasn't the quick, light steps of a deer. It wasn't the shuffling trot of a bear. This was a slow, deliberate bipedal walk. 2 feet, one after the other. Thump, thump. Each step was followed by a squelching sound as whatever it was lifted its foot out of the wet leaf litter and mud. It was walking on 2 legs, and it was big. You could tell by the spacing of the steps and the sheer force behind them, this wasn't a person. No person I've ever known weighs that much or walks with that kind of raw, ground-shaking power. The feeling of being watched hit me then, and it was so intense it was almost a physical pressure. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a stare, a focused, predatory stare that felt like it was pinning me to the spot. I could feel it on the back of my neck, a cold spot right between my shoulder blades. My skin was crawling. Every hair on my arms and the back of my neck was standing straight up. I was literally trembling, a fine, uncontrollable shake that started in my hands and ran all the way up my arms into my core. My mouth was bone dry, my throat so tight I couldn't have swallowed if I tried. Thump. Squelch. Thump. It was getting closer, not fast, but steadily. It was moving at an angle, not directly toward me, but on a path that would bring it to within 30, maybe 40 yards of my position. I still couldn't see it. The woods were too dense, the rain too steady, but I could track it by sound and by smell. Oh God, the smell was getting stronger with every step it took. It was a wave of hot, wet stink that made my eyes water. My mind was racing, trying to find an explanation. A moose. Too tall, wrong gait, a bear walking on 2 legs, maybe, but for this long. And the smell. I've never smelled a bear that smelled like a slaughterhouse mixed with an outhouse. And the silence. Why was everything else so quiet? The woods know when a predator is around, and they were screaming with their silence that this was the top of the food chain. I made the decision then. I had to get out. The thought of waiting to see what it was never even crossed my mind. This wasn't curiosity. This was terror. Pure, undiluted, get the hell out of here now terror. My turkey hunt was the last thing on my mind. My only thought was getting back to my truck. Moving was the hardest part. I was terrified that any sound I made would draw its attention directly to me. I slowly, so slowly it felt like an eternity, shifted my weight. My muscles were stiff with fear. Every tiny rustle of my camo jacket sounded like a roar in that dead quiet. I got into a low crouch, my knees popping loudly. I winced, holding my breath. The footsteps stopped. My blood went cold. The thump squelch just ceased. The only sound was the hiss of the rain. It had heard me. It knew exactly where I was. The feeling of being watched intensified, becoming a laser focus. It was no longer just watching the area. It was watching me. I could feel its attention like a weight, pressing down on me. I stayed frozen in that half crouch, not daring to move a muscle. I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, panicked drumbeat. I was sure it could hear it too. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe a minute. It felt like an hour. I was waiting for it to charge or to let out some ungodly roar. I was picturing it in my head. Something huge and dark and covered in matted hair, with eyes that saw right through me. Then the footsteps started again. Thump. This one was closer, much closer. It had taken a step toward me. It wasn't on its previous path anymore. It was coming for me. That was it. That was all the motivation I needed. Fight or flight kicked in, and there was no fight in me, only flight. I broke. I just stood up and ran. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I crashed through the undergrowth, my shotgun held tight in one hand, my other arm flailing to push branches out of the way. I was slipping on the wet leaves, stumbling over hidden roots. But I didn't stop. I just ran. I ran like I have never run before or since. It was a blind, panicked sprint in what I hoped was the direction of the truck. Behind me, I heard it. A deep, guttural grunt, followed by a sound I can only describe as a roar, but not like a lion or a bear. It was lower, more resonant, a roar of pure fury that seemed to vibrate in my chest. And then the footsteps started again, but they weren't walking anymore. They were running. Thump, 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 thump. The ground was shaking. It was crashing through the trees, not going around them. I heard wood splintering, the sound of small trees being shoved aside or just plain broken. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back and saw it, I think I would have just collapsed. All I could do was run. My lungs were burning, my legs were on fire, and the smell was everywhere, clinging to me, filling my nostrils with every gasping breath. It was chasing me. This thing, this monster, was actually chasing me. I burst out of the thicker woods and onto the two-track. My truck was there, maybe 100 yards away. A beautiful, beautiful sight. I risked a glance over my shoulder. I didn't see it. The woods were a solid wall of grey and green behind me, but I could still hear it. The crashing was getting closer. It was fast, so damn fast. I fumbled for my keys in my pocket, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get a grip. I dropped them in the mud, swore, scooped them up, my fingers numb with cold and fear. I finally got the door unlocked, threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, hitting the lock button over and over like a maniac. I sat there for a second, just panting, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. The truck felt flimsy, like a tin can. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine turned over and roared to life. I threw it into drive and stomped on the gas. The tires spun in the mud for a heart-stopping second before catching, and the truck lurched forward. As I sped down that two-track, bouncing over ruts, I looked in my rearview mirror and I saw it. Just for a second, at the edge of the tree line where I had emerged. It was tall, so incredibly tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet. It was dark, covered in what looked like wet, shaggy hair. It was just standing there, watching me go. I couldn't make out any details of its face, just a massive, dark shape, silhouetted against the darker woods. It didn't move. It just stood. Then I hit a bend in the road, and it was gone. I didn't slow down until I was back on paved road, and even then I was driving way too fast. I drove straight home, walked into my house, and just stood in my kitchen, dripping wet and still shaking. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. Who would believe me? I still hunt. I love the woods. But I have never, ever gone back to that spot. And if I'm going into any remote area now, I don't go alone. And I'm always carrying something more substantial than a shotgun for turkeys. That smell, that silence, and the sound of those heavy, squelching footsteps, they're with me for good. I don't know what it was. I don't have an explanation. I just know what I felt, what I smelled, and what I heard. And I know it was real. Story 10. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I think I need to get it out there. Maybe writing it down will help, or maybe it'll just make me relive the whole thing. But here goes. I've lived on this farm my whole life, pretty much. It's been in the family for generations, and after my wife passed a few years back, it's just been me and Rusty, my old border collie. He's been my shadow through everything, you know. Anyway, this happened on a Tuesday morning, just a regular day that turned into something I still can't wrap my head around. I woke up like I always do, around 5 in the morning. The sun wasn't even up yet, but the sky was starting to lighten, that soft grey before dawn. Rusty was already at the foot of the bed, wagging his tail, ready to go out. I pulled on my boots and my worn-out jacket, the one with the torn pocket I keep meaning to fix, and headed outside. The air was cool, with that damp smell of dew on the grass, and everything was quiet except for the distant sound of the creek down by the south pasture. Normal stuff, nothing out of the ordinary. I started with the chickens, scattering feed and checking for eggs. Rusty trotted along, sniffing around the coop like he does every morning. Then I moved on to the pigs. We've got a small pen and a barn where they shelter, and that's when I first noticed something was off. The barn door was open, not wide, but enough that it shouldn't have been. I always latch it shut at night because of raccoons or whatever might get in, and I know I did it the night before. I remember double checking because we'd had some wind and I didn't want it banging around. As I got closer, I caught a whiff of something foul, not just animal waste or rot, but something sharper, almost metallic, mixed with this musky smell, like wet dog but way stronger. It made my nose wrinkle, and Rusty started growling low in his throat, which he doesn't do unless he's really spooked. The pigs were acting weird too, not their usual lazy selves. They were huddled in the corner of the pen, squealing softly, and one of them, the big sow named Bessie, was pacing back and forth, her ears twitching. My heart started beating a little faster, but I figured maybe a coyote had gotten in or something. I grabbed the pitchfork leaning against the barn wall, just in case, and pushed the door open wider. The inside was dark, with only slivers of light coming through the cracks in the walls. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and that's when I saw it. In the back corner, near the hog trough, there was this huge, upright figure. It was covered in dark, matted fur, and it was holding my dead hog, the one we called Pork Chop, like it was nothing. The hog was limp, and blood was dripping onto the straw-covered floor. The figure was massive, taller than any man I've ever seen, with broad shoulders and long arms. Its head was kind of human-like, but heavier, with a thick brow and deep-set eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. I froze, completely. My legs felt like they were rooted to the ground, and I couldn't even breathe. It was like time had stopped. The creature turned its head slowly, and its eyes locked with mine. They weren't animal eyes, not like a bear or a wolf. They were intelligent, almost curious, but with this primal intensity that made my blood run cold. I felt this wave of sheer terror wash over me, so strong that my hands started shaking, and I dropped the pitchfork. The clatter echoed in the barn, but the creature didn't flinch. It just kept staring at me, and I could see its chest moving as it breathed, slow and steady. Rusty started barking like crazy then, a high-pitched, frantic sound that broke the spell. He was behind me, barking and snarling, and that's what snapped me out of it. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I turned and ran, not even looking back, just sprinting toward the house as fast as I could. Rusty was right on my heels, still barking. I could hear the pigs squealing louder now, and I swear I heard a low, guttural sound from the barn, but I didn't dare glance back. I burst into the house, slamming the door shut and locking it, my hands trembling so bad I could barely turn the key. I leaned against the door, gasping for air, and Rusty was whining and pawing at my legs. The whole house felt too small suddenly, like the walls were closing in. I fumbled for the phone on the wall. Yeah, I still have a landline out here, and dialed the police. My voice was shaky when I told the dispatcher what happened, something about a big animal in the barn, and I think I sounded like a lunatic. But she said they'd send someone out. While I waited, I peered out the window toward the barn, but I couldn't see much from there. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows, and everything looked normal except for that open door. I kept expecting to see that thing step out, but it didn't. Rusty stayed by my side, his ears perked, growling every now and then. I grabbed my rifle from the closet and loaded it, my fingers fumbling with the shells. I've hunted my whole life, but I've never felt this scared holding a gun before. The police arrived about 20 minutes later, 2 officers in a squad car. I met them outside, keeping my rifle pointed down but ready. They were calm, professional, but I could tell they were skeptical. I led them to the barn, my heart still racing, and we went inside together. The foul smell was still there, even stronger now, and the blood was pooled on the floor where the hog had been. The creature was gone, but there were these huge footprints in the mud and straw, deep impressions with 5 toes, bigger than any bear track I've ever seen. One of the officers pointed out some dark hair caught on a nail in the wall, and they bagged it as evidence. They asked me a bunch of questions, and I told them everything about the figure, the eyes, how it felt. They nodded and said it was probably a bear, maybe a big one that got disoriented. They told me to be careful, to keep my distance, and that they'd file a report, but I knew it wasn't a bear. I've seen bears out here. They're stocky, they don't stand upright like that, and their eyes don't have that awareness. This was different, this was something else. After they left, I spent the rest of the day on edge. I didn't go back to the barn until later, when I had to deal with the dead hog. I dragged it out and buried it down by the creek, my hands shaking the whole time. The pigs were still skittish, and Rusty wouldn't go near the barn without whining. I checked the footprints again. They led off into the woods behind the property, but I didn't follow. I wasn't about to go tracking that thing. As evening fell, I made sure all the lights were on around the house and barn. I've got motion sensors, but I turned on every bulb I had, even the old ones in the shed. I sat in the living room with my rifle across my lap, Rusty curled up at my feet. Every little noise made me jump. The creak of the house settling, the wind rustling the trees outside. I kept replaying that moment in the barn, the way those eyes locked onto mine. It wasn't just fear. It was this deep, primal feeling of being prey, like I was nothing in the face of something so much bigger and older. I didn't sleep much that night. I dozed off a couple of times, but I'd wake up with a start, thinking I heard something. Rusty would growl occasionally, and I'd strain to listen, but nothing ever came. The farm felt different after that, like the peace had been shattered. It's been weeks now, and I haven't seen it again. But sometimes I'll catch a whiff of that musky smell on the wind, or I'll find a broken branch in the woods that's too high for a deer to reach. I keep the rifle close, and I'm more cautious, but mostly I'm just left with this memory that haunts me. That thing was real, and it was in my barn, and I have no way to explain it to anyone who wasn't there. Story 11. Okay, I'll try to write this out like I'm just typing it up for a forum the way it happened. I'm still shaky thinking about it, even now, years later. It was the 1st of July, 2005. I remember the date because it was a Friday, and I was looking forward to the long weekend. I had plans to go fishing with my buddy on Sunday. Nothing fancy, just getting away from work for a bit. I drive a tri-axle dump truck for a living. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. That day, I was hauling stone, crush number 2, I think, to a hunting camp way out in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania. I'm talking deep woods, the kind of place where your phone has no service and the only sounds are the wind and your own engine. I'd been there before, a few times that spring, so the route was familiar. It was a bright, clear morning, not too hot. I remember the sun coming through the trees, dappling the dirt road. It felt peaceful. I had my window down, the smell of pine and damp earth filling the cab. The camp was about an hour off the main highway, down a series of gravel roads that got progressively narrower and rougher. My job was to dump the stone near their equipment shed, then spread it out with the truck. I pulled in around 10 in the morning, did the dump. The stone roared out of the bed, that loud crashing sound echoing through the trees. It always makes a racket. I remember watching the dust cloud billow up, smelling that dry, rocky dust. After dumping, you have to tailgate it. Basically, I back up over the pile to flatten and spread the stone. But first, I had to chain up my tailgate. The mechanism is manual on that old truck. You swing the heavy gate closed, and then secure it with these thick chains and binders. It's a two-man job really, but I'm used to doing it alone. It's awkward, and it takes a few minutes of grunting and heaving. So I'm there, standing behind the truck, wrestling with this chain. The binder is stiff, and I'm putting my weight into it to click it shut, and that's when I first felt it. This prickle on the back of my neck, a feeling like I was being watched. You know that feeling? It's hard to describe, but it's a physical thing. Your skin just knows. I straightened up and looked around. Nothing. Just trees, deep and shadowy on all sides. The camp building was about 50 yards away, quiet and closed up. No one was supposed to be there. I shrugged it off, told myself it was just the silence playing tricks on me. It's easy to get spooked when you're alone in the woods. I finished locking the chain, the metal clanking loud in the quiet. I got back in the cab, the familiar smell of diesel and old vinyl seats filling my nose. I started her up, the engine rumbling. I put it in reverse and began backing up toward the pile of stone I'd just dumped. I was looking in my mirrors, focusing on lining up the dual rear tires with the edges of the pile. The mirrors on that truck are big, convex things, so they give you a wide, fisheye view of what's behind you. I was watching the pile get closer, adjusting my steering, when I saw something move off to the left side, in the trees at the edge of the clearing. My first thought, my genuine first thought was, that's a bear. It was the right size, and the color through the trees was kind of a tan, skin-like color. We have black bears around here, but sometimes you see lighter colored ones. I figured it was a big one, maybe 300 pounds, just curious about the noise. It was crouched down, partly hidden by a thicket of ferns. I didn't stop backing up, I just kept going, thinking it would run off as I got closer. I was more concerned about not driving off the pile and getting a tire stuck. I kept my eye on it in the mirror. It wasn't moving away, it was just there, watching me. I was getting real close now, maybe 10 feet from the edge of the pile. I remember the crunch of the tires on the smaller stones. I shifted my gaze from the left mirror to the right, making sure I was centered, and then back to the left. It was still there. Now I was about 6 feet away from the pile, and the creature was just off to the side, maybe 15 feet from my bumper. I hit the brakes. The truck jerked to a stop. I was staring right at it through the driver's side mirror. It was crouched, and its back was to me. It had this thick, powerful-looking build, and the hair was a weird, fleshy tan color like raw hide. It didn't look right for a bear. The proportions were off. The arms seemed too long, and then it stood up. It didn't push itself up on its front paws like a bear. It just rose straight up onto 2 legs. It was unbelievably fast and fluid. 1 second, it was a crouched shape. The next, it was towering. My heart just froze in my chest. I mean, it literally felt like my blood turned to ice. The sheer size of it. It was immense. I'm 6 feet tall, and the top of my truck's bed is probably 8 feet off the ground. This thing, standing there, was looking over the bed of my truck. It had to be 8, maybe 9 feet tall. Its back was still to me, and I could see the muscles working under that skin-colored hair. It had broad, huge shoulders. I couldn't breathe. I was just gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. My brain was screaming that this was impossible. Then, from the right side of the road, another one bolted out of the trees. It was smaller, maybe 6 or 7 feet tall, and darker, with reddish-brown hair. It ran across the road in 2, 3 massive strides, and vanished into the woods on the other side. It didn't run like a man. It was a loping, powerful gait, incredibly fast, and it was gone in a blink. But the big one, the one right beside my truck, it started to turn. It began to rotate its upper body, and I saw its head start to come around. That's when I saw the face. It was black, not like skin black, but a dark, leathery, hairless black. I didn't see the eyes. I don't know what color they were. I didn't wait to find out. I slammed the truck into drive and stomped on the gas. The tires spun on the loose stone, spraying pebbles everywhere. I didn't look back. I just focused on the narrow road ahead, yanking the wheel to get turned around. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep a grip. I was gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to break out. In my rearview mirror, as I was speeding away, I stole a glance. Both of them were standing in the road now, watching me go. The big one, the skin-colored one, was fully upright, and the smaller, reddish-brown one was beside it. They were just 2 dark shapes getting smaller in my mirror, 2 things that shouldn't exist, standing on 2 legs in the middle of that dirt road. The drive to my boss's shop was a blur. I don't even remember most of it. I just remember holding the wheel so tight, my arms ached, and my foot was practically pushing the gas pedal through the floorboards. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see one of them running after the truck, but there was nothing, just an empty road. I pulled into the shop yard, tires screeching on the asphalt. I jumped out of the cab, and my legs almost gave out from under me. I was trembling all over. My boss, Frank, was in the garage bay working on a loader. He took one look at me and knew something was really wrong. I must have been pale as a ghost. I started talking, my words tumbling out fast and jumbled. "Frank, you gotta come back with me. There's something out there at the campsite. It stood up, Frank. It stood up on two legs." He's a practical guy, a skeptic. He thought I'd seen a bear, maybe a weird one, but he saw how shaken I was. I wasn't crying or anything, but I was dead serious, and I was scared. I insisted. I told him we had to go back, right now. I needed him to see it, to prove I wasn't crazy. He finally agreed, more to humor me than anything else. He grabbed a couple of big flashlights, even though it was still broad daylight, and we got in his pickup truck and headed back. The ride back was quiet. I didn't know what to say. I just pointed the way, my stomach in a tight knot. We got to the campsite and everything was exactly as I'd left it. The pile of stone, my tire tracks, the spot where I'd chained the gate. It was all quiet. Too quiet. The birds weren't singing. That's the first thing I noticed. The woods were dead silent. We got out of the truck. Frank was looking around, skeptical. "See? Nothing," he said. "Probably just a big bear got you spooked." And then we heard it. It came from the woods to our left, the same direction the smaller one had run into. It started as a high-pitched whistle, sharp and clear, like nothing I'd ever heard from an animal. It wasn't a bird. It was too loud, too deliberate. It cut through the silence and made the hair on my arms stand straight up. The whistle lasted for a couple of seconds, and then it dropped into this low, guttural howl. It was a deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate in my chest. It wasn't a wolf, wasn't a coyote. It was something else entirely. Then, from the same patch of woods, we heard this tremendous crashing sound. Something big was moving through the underbrush, fast. We could hear branches snapping, the sound of heavy footsteps thudding on the ground. It was moving away from us, deeper into the forest. The sound faded quickly, and then the silence returned, heavier than before. Frank just stood there, his flashlight hanging at his side. He looked at me, and his expression had completely changed. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a kind of wary confusion. "What in the hell was that?" he whispered. We didn't say anything else. We both walked over to the edge of the tree line, right where I'd seen the first one. The ferns were trampled down, and there, in the stone dust at the edge of the pile, were footprints. They were fresh, pressed deep into the fine gravel. Frank got down on one knee to look. There were two distinct sets. One was huge, I mean unbelievably huge. We didn't have a tape measure, but Frank held his hand up to it. His handspan is about 9 inches, and the print was nearly double the length. It had to be at least 17 inches long. It was a broad, 5-toed print, human-like, but not human. The other set was smaller, maybe 10 inches long, but just as clearly defined. We just stared at them. There was no denying what they were. They weren't bear tracks. Bears have claws, and their back feet are different. These were like giant human feet. We looked at each other, and without a word, we both got back in the truck and left. We drove back to the shop in complete silence. There was nothing to say. I never went back to that job site. Frank sent another driver to finish the spread. I've driven truck for 20 years, all over this state, and I was always a skeptic about this kind of stuff. Bigfoot, it was a campfire story, a joke. Not anymore. That day changed everything for me. I don't talk about it much because people either think you're lying or you're crazy, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I saw the footprints. To this day, when I have a delivery in a remote area, I get tense. I keep my eyes on the tree line. I don't get out of the cab until I absolutely have to. And I always make sure my doors are locked. I saw something that shouldn't exist. And the worst part is, I think it saw me too. I don't know what it was. I just know I never want to be that close to one again. Story 12. It was the summer of 1993, and the heat in that part of South Carolina just clung to you, thick and heavy even after the sun went down. We lived in a small house on the edge of the woods near Inman, the kind of place where the trees felt like a dark wall at the end of your property line. I was there with my son. He was a grown man, 6'4" and built solid. And my 2 young grandkids were staying with us for a few weeks. The whole reason this even started was because of a stupid telescope. It was one of those cheap department store ones, a birthday present for my grandson. That night, the moon was so bright it almost felt like daytime, one of those clear, huge moons that makes everything look silver and sharp. We decided to take the new telescope out on the deck to try it out. The deck was this rickety wooden thing I was always meaning to fix, and it looked out over the backyard, which was mostly just grass that needed mowing, and then the woods. For the first hour or so, it was fine. We were looking at the moon, the craters were surprisingly clear, and the kids were giggling. But my little dog, a scruffy terrier mix, wouldn't settle down. He was just a ball of nerves, pacing the deck and letting out these sharp, high-pitched barks towards the tree line. At first, I figured it was a raccoon, or maybe a possum. We got them all the time. I'd shush him, he'd quiet down for a minute, and then he'd start right back up, his whole body tense, staring into the blackness between the trees. This went on for what felt like forever. 2 hours, maybe more. The fun had drained right out of the evening. The kids were getting antsy. My son was getting annoyed, and I was just plain tired of the noise. The dog's barking was like a needle jabbing into my skull over and over. Finally, I'd had enough. I figured I'd just walk down there, see what it was, scare it off, and we could all go back inside and have some ice cream. I told my son I was going to check it out. He said he'd keep an eye on me from the deck. I remember the wood of the deck steps feeling rough under my bare feet. The grass was cool and damp. The moonlight was so strong I didn't even need a flashlight. I could see every blade of grass, every lump of dirt. I walked across the yard, the dog scrambling at my heels, still barking his head off. There was a gully that ran along the edge of the property, right near a thick patch of blackberry bushes. The berries were long gone for the season, just thorny tangles left. As I got closer, maybe 20-30 feet away, I saw something in that gully. It was crouched down, low to the ground. My first thought, my genuine first thought, was that it was a big dog, a really big chow dog, the kind with all that fluffy fur. It had this light grey, almost silver colour to it in the moonlight. I could see the shape of its back, rounded and still. I stopped walking. I wasn't scared yet, just irritated. I stomped my foot on the ground, a good solid thump. "Hey, get out of here," I yelled, the way you do at a stray animal. That's when it moved. It didn't get up like a dog. It didn't scramble or lunge. It just unfolded. It straightened its legs and rose up, and it kept rising until it was standing on 2 feet. My brain just froze. It couldn't process what I was seeing. This thing was standing there, and it was tall. Not as tall as my son, but close. Maybe 6 feet. But it was the width of it that stole the air from my lungs. It had these massive, heavy shoulders, like a gorilla you see on TV, just slabs of muscle. It had no neck that I could see. Its head seemed to sit right on top of those huge shoulders, and its face, God, its face. It wasn't long and snouted like a bear. It was flat, almost human, but not. It was all wrong. The moonlight hit it directly, and I could see it was covered in the same light grey hair, shorter on its face. It turned its head, not a quick jerk, but a slow, deliberate turn to look right at me. There was no sound, no growl, no huff. Just silence, and the feeling of my heart trying to hammer its way out of my chest. The world had shrunk down to this patch of grass, the blackberry thorns, and this thing looking at me. Then it moved. It spun around, faster than anything that big had a right to move, and it crashed into the woods. The sound was unbelievable. It wasn't just branches snapping. It was like a car had been driven through the trees. crack, crack, boom. The noise was deafening. This tremendous crashing symphony of destruction barreling away from us through the forest. It was so loud, so violent, it felt like the ground was shaking. I don't remember deciding to run. My body just did it. I spun around, my bare feet slipping on the damp grass, and I sprinted for the house. I could hear my son shouting from the deck, a raw, panicked sound. I heard the screen door slam open. I didn't look back. I just ran. My heart wasn't just beating fast. It was a frantic, painful drumming in my ears and my throat. I could feel the cold sweat soaking through my shirt. I hit the deck stairs, took them two at a time, and practically fell through the door into the kitchen. My son was right behind me, his face white as a sheet. He slammed the door shut and locked it, his hands shaking so bad he could barely turn the deadbolt. The kids were crying, huddled together in the corner of the living room. The little dog was hiding under the table, silent for the first time all night, just trembling. We stood there in the kitchen, panting, listening. For a second, there was nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator. Then it started. From the woods, a scream ripped through the night. It wasn't a human scream. It wasn't an animal scream I'd ever heard. It was this high, piercing shriek that felt like it was drilling right into my brain. It was full of, I don't know, rage, pain, something ancient and wild. It echoed, bouncing off the trees, so you couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from. It felt like it was everywhere. Then another one answered it, from further away. A second one. My son, my big, strong son, who I'd never seen afraid of anything, looked at me, and his eyes were wide with a kind of primal fear I didn't know he was capable of. He whispered, "Mom, what was that?" And his voice was thin and reedy. He looked small. For the first time in his adult life, my 6'4" boy looked small and vulnerable, and that scared me more than anything else. We didn't sleep. We moved the kids into my bedroom, and we sat up all night in the living room with every light in the house on. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? We just listened. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside made us jump. The memory of that thing standing up, the sheer size of it, the way it looked at me, played over and over in my head like a broken record. I could still feel the cold dread sitting in my stomach, a hard, heavy knot. When the sun finally came up, it felt like a reprieve. The world looked normal again. Birds were chirping, the grass was green. It was hard to believe the horrors of the night had been real, but we had to know, we had to see. My son and I, we armed ourselves with a baseball bat and a big kitchen knife, feeling stupid and utterly inadequate, and we went back outside. The yard was peaceful. We walked slowly towards the gully, towards the blackberry bushes. The evidence was there. It was undeniable. Right where the thing had been crouching, the grass was matted down in a huge, wide circle. Not like a deer bed. This was bigger, and on the branches of the blackberry bushes, snagged on the thorns, were clumps of hair, long, coarse hair, the same light grey I'd seen in the moonlight. I reached out, my hand shaking, and touched it. It was wiry, stiff, like a horse's mane, but thicker. I pulled a few strands off and held them in my palm. They were real. Then we saw the footprints. They were in the soft, damp earth of the gully. They were huge. I put my own foot next to one, and it was easily twice as long and twice as wide. They weren't shaped like a bear's paw. They were more like a gigantic human foot, but broader, with the impressions of 5 toes clearly visible in the mud. The stride between them was immense, showing where it had taken off running. We followed the path of destruction into the woods. It was like a tornado had touched down. Saplings were snapped in half, bigger branches were torn down, and there was a clear, wide trail smashed through the undergrowth. The power it must have taken to do that was staggering. We didn't follow it far. The woods got too thick, and the feeling of being watched was so intense it made the hair on my arms stand up. We turned back, and that's when we noticed our neighbor's garden. Their plot was on the other side of our property, separated by a low wire fence. They grew vegetables, lots of them. And it had been raided, not by raccoons. Raccoons make a mess. This was different. The squash plants were torn up, and the squashes themselves, the big yellow ones, were gone. We found them a little ways off, piled up in a small heap, 3 or 4 of them, and each one had a single huge bite taken out of it. The bites weren't neat. They were ragged, like something had just chomped down with immense force, taken one bite and discarded the rest. The teeth marks were huge, far bigger than any dog or bear I'd ever seen. We just stood there, looking at the pile of ruined squash, the footprints, the grey hair in my hand. There was no explanation. No bear does that, no man does that. The last piece of the puzzle, the thing that sealed it for me, was remembering the stories. The old-timers in the area, they talked about things in the swamps, big, hairy things that were seen sometimes from a distance. We were near enough to swampland for it to make a kind of terrible sense. We went back inside and called the police. What else were we supposed to do? A deputy came out, a young guy who looked bored. We showed him the hair, the footprints, the garden. He took a report, wrote some things down, and said it was probably a bear, even though his eyes said he didn't really believe it. He told us to be careful and left. We were on our own. That was it. That was the day. We never saw it again. We heard screams a few more times over the next couple of weeks, always from deep in the woods, always at night. We ended up getting a big, loud dog, and we put up motion sensor lights all around the house. But the feeling was gone. The safety I'd always felt in my own home, in my own backyard, was just gone. It was stolen that night. I still have those few strands of grey hair. I keep them in a little plastic bag in a drawer. Sometimes I take them out and look at them, just to remind myself that I'm not crazy. It was real. We all saw it. My son, to this day, doesn't like talking about it. It changed him. It changed all of us. You can walk through those woods now and you'd never know. The trail grew over. The footprints washed away. But I know what was out there that night, standing in my backyard, watching us from the dark. And I know that whatever it was, it's probably still out there. Story 13. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I've never posted anything like this before, but I've been reading stories on here for a while, and I guess it's my turn. I need to get this out. This happened years ago, but sometimes it feels like it was yesterday. I still get this cold, tight feeling in my chest when I think about it, which is why I usually try not to. It was October 26, 2006, a Thursday. I remember that because Thursdays are usually my lightest days at the clinic in Zolo. I'm a chiropractor. Mostly people, but sometimes if someone's desperate and it's an animal I'm comfortable working on, I'll make a house call for a horse with a pinched nerve or something. That's what this was, a guy named Ed, who owned a ranch way out past Concho. His prize quarter horse had thrown its back out. Ed was a good client, had sent a lot of people my way over the years, so when he called, sounding pretty worried, I told him I'd come out after my last appointment. So there I was, driving. It was a little after 2 in the afternoon. The sun was high and bright, the kind of clear Arizona day that makes everything look sharp and washed out at the same time. I was driving my old Ford F-150, the green one. I'd had my coffee, I had the window rolled down, my elbow resting on the door. The air smelled like dust and juniper. I was just thinking about the adjustments I'd do on the horse, running through the anatomy in my head, not really paying attention to much else. This is a drive I'd done a bunch of times. You take the main highway out of Zolo, and then after about 20 minutes you turn off onto this smaller county road that cuts through a long stretch of nothing. It's scrubland mostly, some mesquite trees, patches of cholla cactus, lots of rocks. You can see for miles. I was maybe 10-15 minutes onto this county road. I had the radio on low, just some classic rock station fading in and out. I remember a Bruce Springsteen song was playing. I was just cruising, not another car in sight, which is normal out there. The road is pretty much straight, rising and falling with the gentle rolls of the land. Then I saw something. It was way up ahead, half a mile maybe. At first, my brain just registered movement. Something big, stepping out from the left side of the road, from behind a clump of those scraggly junipers. My first thought, my absolute first instinctual thought, was that it was a big dog, a really big one, like a Great Dane or maybe a stray mutt. But that didn't make sense. Who lets a dog like that run loose out here? And it was moving wrong. It didn't lope, it didn't amble, it stood up, it just rose from a crouch, or maybe it was already standing, I don't know. But in that split second, my brain short-circuited. This thing stood upright, completely, and it was tall. I'm bad with estimates, but I remember looking at one of those yellow diamond-shaped road signs, the ones for deer crossing, and thinking, yeah, it was about that tall, maybe 7, 8 feet. It was covered in hair. Long, shaggy, dark brown hair, almost black in places. It wasn't bulky like a bear. It was built more like a powerful man, but covered in that thick pelt. It moved across the road from my left to my right. It didn't run like a man, though. It didn't have that jogging gait, and it sure as hell didn't run like a bear with that rolling, shoulder-heavy shuffle. This was different. It was fast, brisk, like you said. Its legs moved in these long, purposeful strides, but its upper body was weirdly still, straight-backed. It just ate up the distance. It took it maybe 3, 4 of those huge strides to cross both lanes and the gravel shoulder. A jolt went through me. It wasn't just surprise. It was a physical thing, a spike of pure cold adrenaline that shot up my spine and locked my joints. My hands clenched on the steering wheel. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a hard, frantic thumping that was suddenly louder than the radio, louder than the wind from the window. My foot instinctively lifted off the gas. The truck slowed. I was close enough now to see details I wish I hadn't. The way its arms swung, not like a human's, but with a pendulum-like rhythm that matched its strides. The hair wasn't just a solid mass. It was matted in places, longer on its shoulders and head. I didn't see its face. I don't think I wanted to. My eyes were just fixed on the whole of it, this impossible shape moving with a speed and purpose that felt all wrong for the middle of a quiet afternoon. And then it was gone. It reached the other side of the road and just vanished into the brush. It didn't crash through it. It didn't make a sound. 1 second it was there, a dark, massive figure against the pale dirt and green-grey scrub. And the next, it was just absorbed by the landscape, like it had never been there at all. My truck had slowed to a crawl. I was just staring at the spot where it disappeared. The silence in the cab was deafening. I realized I'd been holding my breath and let it out in a shaky gasp. My hands were trembling. I could feel a fine layer of sweat on my forehead, cold despite the warm air blowing in. What the hell was that? That's the thought that looped in my head. What the hell was that? It wasn't a bear. I've seen bears. I've lived in this part of Arizona for over 12 years. I've seen javelina, coyotes, mountain lions, elk. This was none of those things. A bear doesn't stand that straight and run that fast. A man in a fursuit out here in the middle of nowhere at 2:30 on a Thursday? Why? It made no sense. None. I should have stopped. I know that's what people think. I should have pulled over, gotten out, looked for tracks, something. But I didn't. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. The idea of getting out of my truck, of walking toward that line of brush where that thing had just disappeared, it made my skin crawl. It felt like a profoundly stupid thing to do, and I had my appointment. Ed was waiting. It sounds ridiculous now, worrying about being late when I'd just seen that. But in the moment, my brain was scrambling for anything normal to hold on to. You have a job to do. You're expected. Keep driving. It was like a mantra. So I did. I pushed my foot back down on the gas. The truck accelerated, and I kept my eyes glued to the right side of the road as I passed the spot. The brush looked undisturbed. No broken branches. No obvious path. Nothing. It was just the same dense, thorny scrub as everywhere else. For the next 10 minutes, my whole body was on high alert. Every shadow between the trees looked like it was moving. Every rock formation looked like a hunched-over figure. My neck was stiff. My shoulders were up around my ears. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see it loping after the truck. I felt exposed in the cab, like the glass and metal were no protection at all. I got to Ed's ranch. I did the adjustment on his horse. My hands were still a little unsteady, but I've been doing this long enough that my hands know what to do even when my head isn't fully in the game. Ed was talking about the weather, about the price of feed, and I was nodding, making the right sounds, but I wasn't really there. I was still back on that road, watching that thing move. I kept seeing it, the way it stood, the way it ran, that straight back. It's a detail that stuck with me. Animals, when they run on two legs, they're clumsy. They lean forward. This thing was balanced, efficient. It was built for it. I finished up with the horse, declined Ed's offer for a beer, and got back in my truck. The drive home was worse. The sun was lower, casting long, deep shadows across the land. Every shadow felt like a hiding place. I drove faster than I should have, my knuckles white on the wheel, my eyes constantly scanning, searching. I didn't see anything, nothing at all. The road was just a road. The brush was just brush. The normality of it was almost more unsettling. I got home. My wife was in the kitchen making dinner. I must have looked like hell because she asked me if I was feeling okay. I just stood there for a second and then it all just came tumbling out. I told her everything. The thing on the road, how it looked, how it moved, the fear. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I was just telling her what I saw, my voice probably sounding as shaky as my hands had been. She didn't laugh. She didn't tell me I was crazy. She just listened, her face getting more and more serious. When I was done, she was quiet for a minute. Then she said, "You know, my cousin's husband, the one who hunts up near the Mogollon Rim, he swears he saw something like that a few years back, called it a Sasquatch." That word, Sasquatch, it hung in the air between us. It sounded so ridiculous, like something from a bad movie, but it also fit. It fit perfectly. We spent the rest of that night, and a lot of nights after, on the computer. This was before all this social media stuff was big, but there were forums. We found them. We read accounts from other people in Arizona, in New Mexico, all over the Southwest, and the details. They were all so similar. The height, the dark long hair, the way it moves fast and straight-backed, the way it just vanishes. Reading those stories, it was like reading my own experience written by strangers. It was chilling. It made the knot in my stomach tighten. It wasn't just me. I hadn't imagined it, but that almost made it worse. If it wasn't my imagination, then it was real. And if it was real, then everything I thought I knew about the world, about this state I've lived in for over a decade, was wrong. There's something out there in those empty spaces, something that doesn't fit in any field guide, something that walks on two legs and doesn't want to be seen. The terror moment for me, the one that still wakes me up sometimes, wasn't just seeing it. It was that instant of realization, that jolt. It was the moment my brain, which is a practical, logical thing trained in anatomy and physiology, had to accept that it was looking at something impossible. It was the shattering of reality, right there in broad daylight on a quiet afternoon drive. 1 second, the world made sense. The next, it didn't, and it never really has since. Story 14. It was a Tuesday, middle of October, around 4 in the afternoon. I remember because I'd taken the day off work to go out on the airboat, something I do a couple times a month to clear my head. The upper St. Johns River near Lake Winder in Florida is my usual spot. It's quiet, mostly swamp and marshland, with cypress trees dripping Spanish moss and water that's dark and still. I've been going out there for years, ever since I moved to the area, and I've always felt at home in the wilderness. That day the sky was overcast, not raining but grey and heavy, like it might storm later. The air was humid, the kind that makes your shirt stick to your back even when you're not moving. And there was that swamp smell, damp earth, decaying plants, a hint of something alive and wild. I was alone, which isn't unusual for me. My buddy, who usually comes with me, had to bail last minute, but I figured, what the hell, I'd go anyway. I needed the solitude. I launched the airboat from a ramp off Route 50, one of those spots where the river widens out, and headed upstream. The boat's an old thing I've had for a decade, loud as hell with that big fan on the back, but it gets me where I need to go. I'd been cruising for about an hour, just enjoying the silence once I cut the engine in a calm stretch. The water was like glass, reflecting the grey sky, and all I could hear was the occasional splash of a fish or the cry of a bird in the distance. It was peaceful, you know, the kind of peace that makes you forget about bills and work and all that crap. Around 5:30, I decided to stop and take a break. There's this little cove I like, sheltered by a thicket of cypress knees and tall grasses, where the water's shallow and the current slow. I cut the engine, and the sudden quiet was almost overwhelming. I'd brought a thermos of coffee with me, black, no sugar, the way I like it, and I poured myself a cup. The warmth felt good in my hands because the air was starting to cool down as evening approached. I was just sitting there, sipping my coffee, watching the light fade, thinking about nothing in particular. That's when I heard the first noise. It was behind me, off in the trees lining the bank. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a hog rustling through the underbrush. Out there, you get used to sounds like that. But this was different. It wasn't the soft crunch of leaves or the snap of a twig. It was heavier, like something big was moving, and it had a rhythm to it, almost deliberate. I shrugged it off, took another sip of coffee, but my heart started beating a little faster. I've spent enough time in the woods to know when something doesn't feel right, and this didn't. A few minutes passed and I heard it again, closer this time. It sounded like footsteps, but not human, deeper, with a weight behind them that made the ground vibrate slightly. I could feel it through the boat, a faint tremor in the aluminum hull. I set my coffee down, the plastic cup wobbling on the seat beside me, and I turned to look over my shoulder. The trees were thick, shadows stretching long in the fading light, and I couldn't see anything. But I could hear it moving, slow and steady, like it was circling me. My skin prickled, and that familiar swamp chill settled in my bones. I told myself it was probably a bear. Florida has black bears, and they're not uncommon in the area, but something in my gut said no. Bears don't move like that. They're quicker, more erratic. Then, something hit the boat. Not hard, but enough to make the whole thing shudder. It was a dull thud, like a log bumping against the side, but there weren't any logs around. I stood up, my legs feeling wobbly, and peered over the edge. The water was murky, dark with silt, and I couldn't see much. But then I noticed the rudders, the metal fins at the back that helped steer the boat. They were smeared with mud, thick, dark mud, like someone had reached up and wiped it on there. That's when the fear really started to set in. Mud doesn't just appear on rudders when you're in deep water. You'd have to be in the shallows or something, but I was in a spot where the water was at least 6 feet deep. Before I could process it, a clump of mud flew out of nowhere and hit me square in the chest. It was cold and wet, splattering across my shirt, and I stumbled back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I fumbled for the flashlight I keep on the boat, a heavy-duty one with a bright beam, and my hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I clicked it on, the light cutting through the gloom, and I swept it across the bank. That's when I saw it. In the beam of the flashlight, maybe 20 feet away, half hidden behind a cypress tree, was a face, not a human face. It was hairy, covered in dark, matted fur, with a broad, flat nose and eyes that reflected the light back at me, glowing like an animal's in the dark. They weren't like deer eyes or anything I'd seen before. They were bigger, more intense, and they were staring right at me. I froze, completely froze. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't move, couldn't look away. It was like every muscle in my body locked up. That face, it was primal, ancient, something that shouldn't exist. It wasn't aggressive, not exactly, but there was an intelligence in those eyes that scared me more than any bear or gator ever could. It was challenging me, like it was saying, "What are you doing here?" I don't know how long I stood there, maybe only a few seconds, but it felt like hours. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. But there was no sense to be made. This wasn't a person in a costume or some trick of the light. It was real, solid, and it was watching me. Then it moved, not toward me, but it shifted, and I saw more of its body, tall, bulky, covered in that same dark hair. It was huge, way bigger than a man, and it blended into the shadows so well that if it hadn't been for the eyes, I might not have seen it at all. Panic hit me like a wave. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered on the deck, but the beam stayed on, pointing off into the trees, and I scrambled for the ignition. My hands were slick with sweat, and I fumbled with the keys, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The engine sputtered, didn't start right away, and in that moment, I thought it was coming for me. I could hear it moving again, heavy footsteps crunching through the undergrowth, getting closer. I turned the key again, and this time the engine roared to life, the fan whirring loudly. I didn't even think. I just shoved the throttle forward, and the boat lurched into motion. I didn't look back. I sped out of that cove, the airboat skimming over the water, spray kicking up around me. The noise was deafening, but it was better than the silence. I headed out into the open lake, Lake Winder, where the water was wider and there were fewer trees. The sky was almost full dark now, just a sliver of twilight left, and the wind whipped through my hair, cold and sharp. I kept going, pushing the boat as fast as it would go, my knuckles white on the controls. Every shadow on the water made me jump. Every sound from the engine made me think it was following me. I didn't stop until I was in the middle of the lake, far from any shore. Then I cut the engine again, and the silence rushed back in. This time, it wasn't peaceful. It was terrifying. I sat there, shivering, my clothes damp from the spray and sweat. I could still feel the mud on my chest, cold and gritty, and I wiped at it with a trembling hand. The flashlight was still on the deck, its beam pointing uselessly at the sky, so I picked it up and kept it trained on the water around me, scanning for any sign of movement, but there was nothing, just the dark, endless water and the sound of my own breathing. Hours passed. I don't know how many, but it felt like forever. I stayed out there, drifting slowly, too scared to go back to shore. The sky slowly lightened from black to grey, and eventually the sun started to rise, casting a pale glow over the lake. With the dawn came a little bit of courage, but not much. I knew I had to head back eventually. I needed to get home, and the boat was low on fuel, but the thought of going near that cove again made my stomach twist. When the sun was fully up, I started the engine and made my way back to the ramp, keeping to the open water as much as possible. I didn't stop anywhere, didn't look at the banks. I just focused on getting the hell out of there. When I finally pulled up to the ramp, my hands were still shaking, and I had to sit in the truck for a few minutes before I could even think about loading the boat. That was it. That one day changed everything for me. I've been back to the river since, but never alone. I always bring someone with me now, even if it's just for an hour, and every time I'm out there I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. That face, those reflective eyes, it's burned into my memory. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to know. All I know is that the wilderness isn't what I thought it was, and I'll never look at it the same way again. My story 15. I parked my truck at the old gravel pull-off where the logging road peters out. The familiar crunch of the gravel under my boots was the only loud sound. After that, it was just me and the woods. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Not a normal quiet, but a thick, heavy quiet, like the forest was holding its breath. I shrugged it off. It was early. The birds weren't even up yet. I loaded my shotgun, a simple 20 gauge I've had for years, and started down the game trail that follows the creek. The plan was simple. Find a good spot, sit still, and wait for the squirrels to start moving. The air was damp and cold, and I could see my breath pluming out in little clouds. I remember the smell, wet leaves, damp earth, that crisp decay smell of autumn. I was focused on the trees, looking for movement in the branches, listening for the rustle of leaves that means a grey squirrel is foraging. That's when I heard the first knock. It wasn't a natural sound. I know what a branch breaking sounds like. I know what a tree falling in the distance sounds like. This was different. It was a deep, resonant thump, like someone had taken a giant sledgehammer to the trunk of a solid oak tree. It was so loud it seemed to vibrate in my chest. It came from across the creek, maybe a couple 100 yards away into the deeper woods. I froze mid-step, 1 foot still in the air. My first stupid thought was, another hunter. But who the hell would be out here beating on a tree with a log at this hour? And why? It didn't make any sense. I stood there for a full minute, maybe 2, just listening. The silence rushed back in, even heavier than before. It was oppressive. Then 2 more knocks came, one right after the other. Thump, thump. They had the same powerful, deliberate quality. These weren't random. They felt like a signal. A cold knot started to tighten in my stomach. This wasn't right. This was all wrong. I should have turned around then. Every sensible bone in my body was screaming at me to get back to the truck, but curiosity is a hell of a drug. It mixes with fear and creates this stupid cocktail of bravery. I had to know. I had to see what was making that sound. I remember consciously deciding to move toward it. I broke my own rule, the one my granddad drilled into me. You never go toward the strange sound in the woods. You always go away from it. So I started moving, but not like I was hunting squirrels anymore. I was stalking whatever was making that noise. I moved slower than I've ever moved in my life, placing each foot down with painstaking care, heel to toe, avoiding every single twig and dry leaf. I crossed the creek at a shallow riffle, the icy water soaking my boots and jeans up to the knees, the cold a sharp shock that barely registered. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that was surely loud enough to give me away. I got maybe 50 yards into the woods on the other side when another set of knocks echoed out. This time, they were closer, a lot closer. Maybe only 60, 70 yards ahead of me now, and they were different. Instead of 3 spaced-out knocks, it was a rapid 1, 2, 3, 4. It was faster, more urgent. It felt like a response, a reply. To what? To me. Was something answering the first knocks, or was it answering the sound of my movement? The fear was real now, a physical thing crawling up my spine. It was that primal fear, the kind you don't get from watching a scary movie. This was the fear your ancestors felt when they knew a predator was nearby. My mouth went dry. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead despite the chill. I raised my shotgun, my fingers tight on the stock and fore end, the barrel pointing where I was looking. I kept moving, my eyes straining against the deep shadows between the trees. The undergrowth was thicker here, a mess of ferns and fallen logs. I pushed through a thicket of young hemlocks, their branches wet with dew, and that's when I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process it. I thought it was a bear, a big black bear crouched down behind a giant moss-covered log that had fallen years ago. It was just a shape, a massive dark shape, hunkered down. I stopped dead, my breath catching in my throat. I brought my gun up, my finger resting alongside the trigger guard, but then it moved. It didn't move like a bear. A bear is all shoulders and lumbering weight. This thing, it straightened up. It didn't push itself up on its front legs. It just rose. It unfolded from that crouch and stood up on 2 legs, just like a man. That's when the terror truly hit me. It was a wave of pure, undiluted ice water that washed over me from head to toe. My legs felt weak. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 8 feet, maybe more. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't shaggy or matted like a bear's. It was a solid, dense black, like coarse fur, and it covered its entire body. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they were thick, powerfully built. But it was the chest that made my stomach drop. It had this massive, barrel-shaped chest, like a power lifter or a gorilla, impossibly wide and deep. It was built. It was solid. It was just standing there, side on to me, maybe 40 feet away. It hadn't seen me yet. I was frozen, camouflaged by the hemlocks, hoping to God I was just another shadow. I could see its head now. It was conical, sloping back from heavy brow ridges. I couldn't make out any distinct facial features, just darkness under that brow. And then it turned its head. It didn't jerk its head around. It was a slow, deliberate turn, and it looked right at me. I can't explain the feeling. It knew I was there. I felt its awareness like a physical force. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a direct, intelligent look. Its eyes, I couldn't see the color, but I could feel the focus. It was assessing me. In that single moment, any last thought of it being a bear, a man in a suit, any rational explanation just vaporized. This was something else, something that wasn't supposed to be real. We stood there, locked in that stare for what felt like an eternity. It was probably only 2 or 3 seconds, but time stretched out. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears. I could feel every single beat of my heart. I could smell the damp fur from where I stood, a musky, earthy smell, like a wet dog, but stronger, wilder. My mind was screaming, a silent internal shriek of pure panic. My training, what little I had, kicked in. Don't run. Running triggers a predator's chase instinct. Back away slowly. Don't make any sudden moves. I broke eye contact first. I looked down at the ground. A submissive gesture I didn't even think about. It was just instinct. I took a slow, shuffling step backward. My legs were trembling so badly, I wasn't sure they'd hold me. I kept my shotgun pointed in its general direction, but my arms felt like rubber. I was gripping it so tight my knuckles were white. I took another step back, then another. I didn't turn my back on it. I couldn't. I kept it in my peripheral vision. It hadn't moved. It was just standing there, watching me retreat. That was almost worse than if it had charged. The intelligence in that stillness was terrifying. It was calculating. It was letting me go. I backed through the hemlock thicket, the branches scraping against my jacket. I backed across the creek, the water feeling 10 times colder now. I didn't slip. I was hyper-aware of every single movement, every sound. I expected at any second to hear a crash in the undergrowth, to see that huge, dark form barreling toward me. I made it to the other side and kept backing up the game trail. Only when I had put another 100 yards between us, when the trees had swallowed the spot where I'd seen it, did I allow myself to turn around. I didn't run. I walked as fast as I could without breaking into a sprint, my head on a swivel, listening for any sound behind me. I heard nothing. No knocks, no footsteps, just the deafening silence, which was now more frightening than any noise could have been. The walk back to the truck was the longest of my life. Every shadow looked like a crouching form. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a footstep. My neck was prickling the whole time, the feeling of being watched so intense it was like a physical weight on my shoulders. When I finally saw my truck through the trees, I almost cried with relief. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door unlocked. I threw my shotgun onto the passenger seat, scrambled in, and locked the doors. I sat there for a full 10 minutes, just gripping the steering wheel, trying to get my breathing under control. I was drenched in a cold sweat. I started the engine and got the hell out of there. I didn't stop until I was on the main paved road, miles away. For the rest of the day, I was a wreck. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sit still. The image of that thing standing up, turning its head, looking right at me, was burned into my brain. I felt like I was going crazy. I had to know. I had to find some kind of explanation, even if it was a crazy one. A couple days later, I went to the town library. I felt stupid, like a kid looking for ghost stories, but I didn't know where else to go. I found a section on local folklore and wildlife, and that's where I found a book on Bigfoot. I'd always thought of it as a joke, a blurry photo and a guy in a hairy suit. I started reading the accounts, the descriptions, the barrel-shaped chest, the long arms, the heavy brow, the immense height, the wood knocks. They called them wood knocks, a way of communicating. My blood ran cold, page after page. It was my experience. It was exactly what I saw. These weren't crazy people. They were loggers, hunters, hikers, people like me. They described the same feeling of being watched, the same primal fear, the same intelligence in the creature's eyes. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel special. I just felt a deep, profound dread. It was real. This thing that wasn't supposed to exist was real, and it was out there in those woods I'd loved since I was a boy. I haven't been back to Panther Creek since that morning. I don't think I ever will. I still have my shotgun, but I haven't been hunting since. Some doors, once opened, you can't close. Some things, once seen, you can't forget. I saw it. It saw me. And I still don't know what to do with that. Story 16. All right, I'll just come out and say it. I don't expect a soul to believe me, and most days I can barely believe it myself. But it happened. It's burned into my mind. A picture I can't scrub clean no matter how much time passes. This was back in March of 1851. I remember the air still had that winter bite to it, a sharpness that promised one last frost before spring truly settled in. My name is Hamilton. I was up in the dense woods of Greene County, Arkansas, with a fella I knew from the area. He was more of a business acquaintance than a true friend, a man I'd partnered with on a few trapping lines. We were out for deer, hoping to stock the larder. The forest was thick, the kind of place where the sunlight only came down in dappled patches, and the air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and old pine. We'd been walking for a few hours, moving slow and quiet, our boots making soft, sucking sounds in the wet ground. The woods were usually full of sound, squirrels chattering, birds calling. But that day, there was a quiet that felt wrong. It was a heavy quiet, the kind that presses on your ears. We'd both noticed it, but neither of us had said a word. You don't jinx a hunt by talking about the silence. It was mid-morning when we heard it. At first, it was just a low rumble, like distant thunder, but the sky was a clear, pale blue. We stopped dead in our tracks, listening. The rumble got louder, turning into a pounding, a chaotic drumming that was getting closer fast. Then we saw them through the trees, a drove of cattle, maybe 15 or 20 head, wild-eyed and bellowing in sheer, mindless panic. They weren't running through the woods. They were crashing through it, smashing through underbrush, their sides heaving, foam flying from their mouths. They were running from something that had put the fear of God into them. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. I looked at my companion, and his face was bone white, his knuckles white where he gripped his rifle. We just stood there, frozen, as the last of the cattle crashed past us and the sound of their terror faded away. The silence that rushed back in was even heavier than before, and now it was filled with a new kind of dread. What in God's name could make a whole herd of cattle run like that? We didn't have to wait long for an answer. We were still standing there, rifles half raised, trying to make sense of it, when we saw movement about 40 yards ahead, where the cattle had burst from. The undergrowth there was thick, a wall of green briars and young saplings. Something was standing up. It uncoiled itself from the shadows, and my breath caught in my chest. It was a man, but it wasn't a man. It was gigantic. I'm not a small man myself, but this thing would have towered over me by a good 2 feet, maybe more. Its body was covered in hair, a coarse, dark, almost blackish-brown hair, like that of a bear, but it was shaped like a man. It had broad, powerful shoulders and a deep chest. Long, matted locks of this same hair hung down from its head, shrouding its neck and shoulders, making it hard to see where its head ended and its body began. It stood there for a moment, completely still, and it was looking right at us. I could feel its gaze. It wasn't a frantic, animal look. It was an unnerving, deep calm. Its eyes, I'll never forget its eyes. They were set deep under a heavy brow, and they were intelligent. They weren't the dumb black eyes of a bear. They held a knowing, a chilling awareness. They locked onto mine, and for a few heartbeats the entire world narrowed down to that single point. The forest, the cold, my companion, it all just fell away. There was just me and this thing, this wild man, staring at each other across a clearing. A cold sweat broke out all over my body. My fingers, wrapped around the stock of my rifle, were numb. I couldn't have lifted that gun to shoot if my life depended on it. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by a fear so old and so deep, I didn't even have a name for it. It was a primal fear, the kind your ancestors felt when a shadow moved in the dark outside their cave. This wasn't just an animal. This was something else. It felt like an eternity, but it could only have been a few seconds. Then, without any warning, it turned. It didn't lope or run like a bear. It moved with a power and grace that was terrifying. It took a bounding leap, covering an impossible distance in a single jump. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was leaping 12, maybe 14 feet at a time. Its feet, which I could see clearly as it pushed off, were huge. It crashed through the underbrush, not with the clumsy panic of the cattle, but with a raw, focused power, and in moments, it was gone. The sound of its passage faded, swallowed by the silent woods. We stood there for a long time, maybe 5 minutes, just breathing. The air felt thin, like there wasn't enough of it. My legs were trembling so badly I thought I might collapse. I finally looked over at my companion. His mouth was hanging open, and he was just shaking his head slowly back and forth. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. I just nodded. I couldn't speak. We forced our legs to move, walking on unsteady feet to the spot where the thing had been standing. The ground was soft, churned up by the cattle, and there, plain as day, were its footprints. I knelt down, my knees sinking into the mud. I pulled out my hunting knife and laid it next to one of the prints for scale. The print was massive. My knife was a good 10 inches long, and the print was longer. I measured it carefully. 13 inches. From the heel to the tip of the longest toe, it was 13 damn inches long. The shape was human-like, but broader, more splayed. It was the track of a giant. That's when the full weight of it hit me. The local stories, the tales old-timers would tell around the fire about a hairy beast that roamed the woods in St. Francis Green and Poinsett counties. They weren't just stories, they were true. We had just looked it in the eye. We didn't say a word to each other on the walk back. There was nothing to say. The hunt was forgotten. All we wanted was to get out of those woods. Every shadow seemed to move, every snap of a twig made us jump. The forest, a place I'd known my whole life, had become alien and menacing. When we got back to the settlement and told people, they reacted how you'd expect. Some thought we'd been drinking, others thought we'd seen a large bear and let our imaginations run wild. But the terror in our eyes must have been genuine, because a few of the more adventurous men listened. The story spread down the river, all the way to Memphis. I heard later that a party of men from Memphis, armed and determined, actually set out to try and capture the thing. I don't know if they ever found anything. I didn't care to ask. For me and my companion, the hunt was over. The memory of that thing, of its calm, intelligent stare, and the sheer, raw power in its movements, haunted me. It still does. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the image of it rising from the undergrowth flashing behind my eyes. The fear wasn't just about the size or the strength of it. It was the knowing in its eyes. It saw us. It recognized us as something different, and it chose to leave. That single day in the woods of Greene County changed everything. It solidified a truth I never wanted to know. There are things in the deep woods, things that belong to an older, wilder world, and we are just visitors there. The creature is out there, somewhere in the wilderness, and the memory of its stare, and the chill that ran down my spine as it turned to flee, is something I will carry with me until the day I die. I can still see it, clear as yesterday, vanishing into the trees, leaving nothing behind but a set of giant tracks in the mud and a fear that has never really left me. Story 17. All right, I'll just come out and say it. I saw something up on that ridge last summer that I still can't explain, something that scared me more than any wildfire ever has. And I've been a seasonal firefighter in northern British Columbia for 8 years now. I've seen some shit. I've been in spots where the heat blisters the paint off your helmet and the air is so thick with embers it looks like it's snowing fire. But none of that compares to what happened that one afternoon. It was late July, the peak of the season. We'd been called out to a new lightning strike fire that was chewing its way through a steep wooded valley. The smoke was already a problem, a thick greyish-brown haze that made everything look like a bad photograph and stung your eyes and throat no matter how you adjusted your respirator. My crew was working a different section of the slope, building a containment line, and I'd been sent ahead, alone, to scout a potential fire break along a high ridge. It was standard procedure. Sometimes you need to get a look from above to see how the land lies, to find a natural barrier the fire might respect. The climb up was a grind. The underbrush was thick with deadfall, and the ground was a loose, rocky shale that slid out from under my boots. My gear felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The Nomex pants and jacket, the heavy boots, the pack with my water bladder and gear, the chainsaw slung over one shoulder, and the fire axe in my belt. The air was hot and still, and the only sounds were my own ragged breathing, the crunch of my boots, and the constant distant roar of the fire, a sound like a freight train that never arrives. I reached the top of the ridge, maybe an hour after I'd set out. The view should have been spectacular, but it was just a wall of smoke to the west, with the sun, a dull orange coin, trying to pierce through. Up here, the smoke was a little thinner, hanging in the air like a dirty curtain. I unslung the chainsaw, got it fired up, and started cutting a small clearing so I could get my bearings and call in what I was seeing. The scream of the saw was deafening, a violent noise that felt good because it was something I controlled. I was cutting through a stubborn, thick-branched spruce when I shut the saw off to take a breather and wipe the sweat and grime from my face. In the sudden, ringing silence, I heard it. A rustling, not the light skittering of a squirrel or a bird. This was heavier, a solid shuffling through the dry leaves and dead twigs off to my left, downwind, maybe 30 yards away, just inside the tree line where the smoke was coiling through the pines. My first thought, my only logical thought, was that it was one of the guys. Maybe the crew boss had sent someone up after me, or another scout from a different team had reached the same ridge. I squinted into the haze. I could see movement, a dark shape shifting between the trees. It was big, man-sized. "Hey!" I called out, my voice hoarse from the smoke. "Over here!" The movement stopped. The woods went quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than noise. I stood there waiting for a reply, for a wave, for something. Nothing. I remember feeling a prickle of irritation. If it was another firefighter, why weren't they answering? It was basic protocol to call out, to identify yourself. I took a few steps forward, my boots crunching on the freshly cut branches. "Hello? That you, Mike?" I tried again, naming the only other guy I thought might be up this way. Still nothing. The air felt thick, charged. The distant roar of the fire seemed to fade into the background, like someone had turned the volume down on the world. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. I took another step, and that's when I saw the shape move again. It wasn't walking between the trees anymore. It was standing still, and it was taller than any man I'd ever seen. My brain tried to process it. to force it into a recognizable box, a bear standing on its hind legs, a weird shadow from the smoke. But it wasn't. The proportions were all wrong. Then it stepped out of the trees and into the small clearing at the edge of my cut line. My breath just stopped in my chest. It felt like a physical blow. I wasn't looking at a man or a bear or anything I had a name for. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 8 feet, maybe more. Its shoulders were massive, rounded and powerful, sloping down into long, thick arms that hung past its knees. It was covered, and I mean completely covered, in hair, not fur, but long, shaggy, dark brown hair, matted in places and streaked with what looked like mud or ash. The sheer bulk of it was staggering. It made a grizzly look compact, but the worst part was its face. It turned its head and looked right at me. The face was mostly flat, with a heavy brow ridge that shadowed its eyes. I couldn't see the color of them from that distance, but I could feel the focus, the intelligence in that gaze. It wasn't the blank stare of an animal. It was assessing me. It let out a sound then, a low, deep exhale that wasn't a growl, more like a sigh, a hoo sound that seemed to vibrate in the pit of my stomach. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to get the hell out of there. But my training kicked in, the part that tells you not to panic in a bad situation. My mind was racing, a frantic, silent scream. What is that? What the fuck is that? I was frozen, just staring, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack one. It took a step, not towards me, but parallel to the tree line. Its movement was fluid, powerful, not clumsy at all. It didn't seem hurried or aggressive. It was just there. Then it stopped, and in a motion that was both graceful and unnerving, it crouched down on its haunches. Its long arms reached forward, and its hands, I got a good look at its hands then, dug into the soil. They were huge, palm-like, with thick fingers. It wasn't just scratching, it was digging, pulling up a clump of moss and roots, examining it almost. It brought the dirt close to its face, sniffed it, then let it fall. That's when the real terror set in, that simple, curious action. An animal digs for food, for grubs. This wasn't that. This was investigation. The intelligence in its eyes wasn't my imagination. It was real. This thing was thinking. It was aware. My hand went to the fire axe on my belt. My fingers closed around the familiar, textured fiberglass handle. It was a comfort, a solid piece of reality in a situation that was rapidly ceasing to make any sense. I didn't pull it out, just held onto it, my knuckles white. I remember the feeling of the rough grip biting into my palm, the weight of the steel head at my hip. I was terrified, a cold, sharp fear that had my whole body trembling, but on the surface, I was calm. I was still breathing, still thinking. Don't make a sudden move, don't provoke it. It seemed completely unconcerned with me. I was just part of the landscape. After a moment, it dropped the dirt and rose back to its full, staggering height. It was then that a shift in the wind brought a fresh, acrid wave of smoke rolling up the ridge from the valley below. The creature's head snapped up. It wasn't a slow turn, it was a sharp, alert movement. It tilted its head back, its broad nostrils flaring. It took a long, deep sniff of the air, sampling the smell of the approaching fire. I saw its body language change. The casual, almost ponderous attitude vanished. It became tense, focused. It scanned the ridge, its head moving slowly from left to right, taking in the smoke, the trees, me. Its gaze passed over me again, and for a split second, I felt like it was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me, and then just as quickly dismissing me as irrelevant. I was no longer even a factor. Then it moved. It didn't run. It turned and took 2 massive, ground-eating strides and just melted back into the trees. It was unbelievably fast and quiet. 1 second it was there, a monolithic, impossible figure at the edge of the clearing, and the next, it was gone. The forest just swallowed it up. There was no sound of crashing branches, no thudding footsteps. It was as if it had never been there at all. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. I was still clutching my axe handle. The roar of the fire seemed to rush back into my ears, louder than before. The world started moving again. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, and my whole body started to shake uncontrollably. I bent over, hands on my knees, and dry heaved, my stomach clenching into a hard knot. I had to get off that ridge. The thought was primal. Go now. I fumbled for the radio on my shoulder, my fingers numb and clumsy. I keyed the mic. Base, this is Scout on Ridgetop Alpha. Come in. My voice was a shaky, thin thing. A crackle, then my crew boss's voice. Go ahead, Scout. What's your sit rep? I couldn't tell him. What would I say? Yeah, boss. I just saw Bigfoot take a dirt sample and then peace out. They'd pull me from the line for heat exhaustion or worse. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to steady. Negative on the firebreak up here. Terrain's too unstable. The fire's moving fast up the western slope. I'm coming back down, now. There was a pause. Copy that, Scout. You sound a little rough. You okay? Do you need assistance? I'm fine, I lied, the words tasting like ash. Just a lot of smoke up here, heading down now. I didn't wait for a reply. I slung my chainsaw back over my shoulder, not even bothering to stow it properly, and started back down the slope, moving faster than was safe on the loose rock. I kept looking back over my shoulder, my eyes straining against the smoke, expecting to see that dark shape following me. I didn't feel safe until I was back with the crew. The sound of their chainsaws and voices a welcome human noise. Later that evening, after the shift, when the adrenaline had faded into a deep, bone-aching weariness, I couldn't let it go. I told my crew boss I thought I'd seen some weird bear sign up on the ridge, and feeling like a complete idiot, convinced him to let me and another guy, Dave, hike back up there with me before it got dark. I needed to see something, anything, to prove I hadn't lost my mind. We reached the clearing. The light was fading, casting long, creepy shadows. And there they were, right where the thing had crouched. Footprints. They were pressed deep into the soft forest floor, clear as day. They were massive. I put my boot next to one. My size 11 fire boot looked like a child's shoe next to it. The print was long, maybe 18 inches from heel to toe. It had a definite arch and 5 clear toe impressions, but they weren't splayed like a bear's. They were more aligned, almost human, but so much bigger and wider. The depth of the impression was shocking. This thing was heavy, unnaturally heavy. Dave whistled, low and long. What the hell kind of bear makes a track like that, he muttered, pulling out his phone to take a picture. I didn't answer. I just stared at those prints. They were real. They were physical. They weren't a trick of the smoke or a heat-induced hallucination. I had seen what made them. We looked around, but there was only the one set coming out of the deep woods and going back in. It was like it had descended from the mountain, taken a look around, and left. We reported the tracks as an unidentified large animal to the wildlife officer attached to our unit. He looked at the photos and just shook his head, baffled. He had no idea what it was. I finished the season. I did my job. But every time I was in the deep woods after that, every time the light was low and the shadows were long, I felt it, a watchful feeling. I'd find myself staring into the trees, my hand drifting to the axe on my belt, my heart rate picking up. The fire was a known danger. It was physics and chemistry. You could fight it. You could predict it. What I saw on that ridge was something else entirely. It was a primal, ancient fear, the kind that lives in the oldest parts of your brain. It was the fear of something that doesn't belong in your world, something that looks back at you with a knowing intelligence that you can't comprehend. I faced down a wall of flame that summer that scorched 100,000 acres, and it didn't chill me half as much as the memory of that quiet, powerful creature digging in the dirt, completely unconcerned with the man standing frozen just a few dozen yards away. I still see it in my dreams, and I still have no idea what it was. Story 18. All right, so I'm Shannon, and I'm just going to put this out there because I need to get it off my chest. My wife and I still can't really talk about it without feeling that cold knot in our stomachs. But here goes. This happened on our property, a place we've called home for years, and it's supposed to be our safe spot. We've had weird stuff happen out here before. Odd noises, things gone missing from the shed, that kind of thing. But nothing like what went down that day. It was one of those early evenings in late summer, where the light starts to soften and everything feels calm, almost too quiet. We decided to take a walk after dinner just to unwind. Our place is pretty secluded, surrounded by woods, and we've got a small pond with a picnic table near it that we like to sit at. It's usually peaceful, you know, the kind of spot where you can hear your own thoughts. That day, we headed out around 6 o'clock, I'd say. The air was still, not even a breeze, and the trees were just standing there like statues. We walked the familiar path down to the pond, hand in hand, not saying much. My wife was a little quiet, which isn't unusual. She's always been more tuned into the surroundings than I am. We reached the picnic table and sat down on the bench, facing the water. The pond was glassy, no ripples, and the reflection of the trees was so perfect it looked like a painting. I remember feeling relaxed, just taking it all in. We'd been there maybe 10 minutes when I noticed something off. It was a single leaf on a birch tree about 20 feet away. It was fluttering like crazy, shaking back and forth real fast, but there was no wind, none at all. I mean, I could feel the stillness on my skin, no rustling in the branches, no movement in the grass, just this one leaf going nuts. It caught my eye because it was so out of place. I nudged my wife and pointed at it, and she saw it too. We both stared, trying to figure out what was making it move. That's when my eyes drifted past it, toward the space between two bigger trees, maybe 30 yards out. And that's when I saw it. This massive, dark shape, just standing there. At first I thought it was a shadow, or a trick of the light, but it was solid. I mean, it was blocking part of the forest behind it, like a black hole in the greenery. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt my wife's hand tighten on mine. She didn't say anything, just froze. The shape was huge. I'd guess 7 feet tall, and across the shoulders it had to be 4 feet wide. It was swaying slowly, like it was shifting its weight from one foot to the other, but it wasn't moving toward us. It was just there. The face, God, I don't even know how to describe it without sounding crazy. It was gorilla-like, but broader and darker, almost like it absorbed the light around it. The features were shadowy, but I could make out a heavy brow and what looked like a flat nose. It didn't have glowing eyes or anything Hollywood like that, just this deep, matte black that made it hard to look at for too long. The air around us felt heavy, charged, like before a storm, but there was no sound, no birds, no insects, nothing. Just that leaf still fluttering, and this thing watching us. We didn't move. I think we were both too scared to even breathe. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, and my skin went cold and clammy. I remember my wife's grip on my hand was vice-tight, her knuckles white. We sat there at that picnic table just staring, for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes. Time kind of stretched out, you know? Every second dragged. I kept expecting it to charge or make a noise, but it didn't. It just kept swaying, slow and steady, like it was waiting for something. I tried to reason with myself in my head. Maybe it was a bear, but bears don't stand that upright for so long, and they're not that broad. And the face... No, it wasn't a bear. The way it was positioned between those two trees, it seemed intentional, like it was using them for cover. But why would it be hiding, unless it was watching us the whole time? That thought sent a chill down my spine. I glanced at my wife, and her eyes were wide, fixed on it. She's usually the brave one, but she looked pale, like she'd seen a ghost. The leaf kept fluttering, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from it or the shape. It was like my brain was trying to process two impossible things at once. The stillness of everything else made it all feel surreal, like we'd stepped into some other dimension where the rules didn't apply. I remember the smell of the pond water, a faint, earthy scent, and the feel of the wooden bench under me, rough and solid. Little details like that stuck with me because they were so normal, but everything else was wrong. After a while, I don't know how long, maybe 5 minutes, the swaying stopped. The thing just went still, and for a second I thought it might be gone, but it was still there, a dark silhouette against the trees. Then, very slowly, it turned its head slightly, and I swear it was looking right at us. Not in an aggressive way, but more like it was acknowledging we were there. That was the moment the fear really kicked in. Up until then, I'd been numb, but now I felt this primal urge to run. My legs were trembling, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back despite the cool air. My wife must have felt it too, because she leaned in close and whispered, "We need to go." Her voice was shaky, barely audible. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We stood up slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. My joints felt stiff, like I'd been sitting for hours. As we started backing away from the table, the thing didn't move. It just watched us. I kept my eyes on it the whole time, half expecting it to lunge, but it stayed put. The leaf was still fluttering, a frantic little motion in the corner of my vision. We made it to the path that leads back to the house, and once we were a few yards away, we turned and started walking faster. Not running, but quick, purposeful steps. I didn't look back until we were almost at the edge of the woods. When I did, the shape was still there, a dark blot in the trees. It hadn't moved. We broke into a run then, not caring about noise or anything, just wanting to get inside. The house felt miles away, even though it was only a couple 100 yards. Every rustle in the bushes made me jump, and I kept imagining something following us. We burst through the back door and locked it behind us, both of us breathing hard. My wife leaned against the wall, her hands shaking. I went to the window and looked out toward the pond, but I couldn't see anything from there. The woods were just a dark mass now, with the evening closing in. We didn't say much for a while, just sat at the kitchen table trying to calm down. I kept replaying it in my head. The leaf, the shape, the stillness, it was so clear, so real. Later that night, we talked about it in hushed tones. My wife said she'd felt the same thing I did. This deep, instinctual fear that wasn't just about the size of the thing, but the intelligence behind it. Like it knew we were there and was choosing not to engage. We've had other weird experiences on the property over the years. Once, we heard something massive moving through the trees at night. Sounds too big for a deer. Another time, we found footprints near the pond that were too large to be human, but we brushed it off as maybe a bear or something. Now, though, it all fits together. This wasn't a one-off. It was confirmation. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak in the house had me on edge, and I kept getting up to check the windows. The next day, we went back to the spot in the daylight, but there was nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, nothing. Just the picnic table and the pond, looking as peaceful as ever. But that feeling of being watched hasn't gone away. We've started avoiding that area, and I find myself scanning the tree line every time I'm outside. I've read stories online about similar things, people seeing big dark figures in the woods, and it always ends with them questioning their sanity. But I know what I saw. My wife saw it too. It was solid, enormous, and it felt ancient, like it belonged there more than we do. The closeness of it, the clarity, I'll never forget that. It's left this indelible mark, this fear of the unknown right in our own backyard. And that leaf fluttering with no wind. I still can't explain that. Maybe it was a warning or just a coincidence. but it's what drew our attention to it. To this day, I get chills thinking about it, and I don't think I'll ever feel safe out there again. Story 19. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I don't know if anyone will believe me, and honestly, I don't even care if you do. I just need to get it out of my head and into words. It's been 3 days, and I still can't sleep for more than an hour without jolting awake. My heart hammering against my ribs like it's trying to escape. My hands are shaking right now just thinking about it. It was this past Tuesday night. I'd been studying at the library in Falk because the Wi-Fi at my mum's house is garbage. And I had a big biology midterm on Wednesday. I was tired, the kind of tired that feels like a weight strapped to your bones. My eyes were gritty from staring at textbooks, and all I could think about was my bed. It was just after 10 o'clock. The library closes at 9, but I'd sat in my car in the parking lot for another hour going over flashcards until the words started to blur together. The drive home is pretty straightforward. You take the main road out of Falk for about 10 minutes, and then you turn onto these county roads that cut through nothing but farmland for miles. There are no streetlights out there. It's just you, your headlights, and a whole lot of dark. I actually like that drive. Usually it's quiet. That night was especially clear. No moon that I remember, but the stars were insane, like someone had thrown a fistful of glitter across black velvet. It was warm for the time of year, so I had the windows down. The air smelled like cut grass and damp earth, that sweet, clean smell you only get out in the country. I had the radio on low, just some staticky classic rock station, and I was just cruising, my mind half on the Krebs cycle and half on the road. I remember passing the old Miller farm. I know their silo is white and has a big crack running down the side near the top. I remember seeing the dark shape of it against the slightly less dark sky. About a mile past their place, the fields on my left opened up. It's just a huge, flat expanse. And in the daytime, you can see for what feels like forever. That night, it was just a black void, and that's when I saw it. At first, my brain just wouldn't process it. It was a shape. A tall, dark shape, just standing there next to one of those big, round hay bales. You know the kind. They looked like giant, shredded wheat biscuits. My headlights swept across the field, and for a split second, I thought it was a person, maybe a farmer out late. But the proportions were all wrong. It was too tall, way too tall, and bulky, not fat, just dense, like a power lifter. My foot instinctively lifted off the accelerator, and the car started to slow down. I was probably going 40, maybe 45, and as I got closer, the shape was just standing there, perfectly still. It was facing away from the road, towards the field. My headlights were hitting its back, and I could see it was covered in what looked like dark, matted hair. Not fur, exactly. It was stringier than that, like wet yarn. The thing that really got me, the first real punch of cold fear, was the sheer size of its shoulders. They were massive, sloping down from a thick neck into these huge rounded mounds of muscle. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they were thick too. It was just standing next to that hay bale, and it made the bale, which is taller than me, look small. I remember my brain scrambling for an explanation. A bear? We don't have bears around here. A guy in a big coat, but no coat is that big, and no person is built like that. This was a solid living thing. I could see the way its body blocked the starlight behind it. I had my high beams on now, and the light was just glinting off this dark, wet-looking hair. Then it moved. It didn't turn around. It just seemed to become aware of me. Its head, which I hadn't really been able to see properly, tilted just a fraction, like it was listening. And then, in one fluid, horrifying motion, it slouched. Its whole posture changed, its back rounding, its head sinking down between those enormous shoulders. It was a predator's crouch. My heart just stopped. I mean, it felt like it froze solid in my chest. I wasn't breathing. It turned its head. I didn't see its face. Thank God I didn't see its face. I saw its profile, a heavy, prominent brow, a flat nose, but it was all just a dark shape silhouetted against the field. The terror wasn't in the details of its face, it was in the sheer, brutal mass of it, the thickness of its neck, the width of its jaw. And then it ran. It didn't run like a man. It didn't run like an animal I've ever seen. It was this powerful, loping gallop, but it was so fast it was unnatural. It took 2, maybe 3 of these huge ground-eating strides from a standstill, and it was on the road right in front of my car. I screamed. I don't even remember making the sound, but my throat was raw afterward. I slammed my foot down on the brake pedal as hard as I could. The tires screeched and the car shuddered, the anti-lock brakes juddering under my foot. The smell of burnt rubber flooded in through the open window. I was thrown forward against my seatbelt, which dug into my shoulder and chest. It crossed the road in that single, fluid lope. My headlights were right on it. This is the image that is burned into the back of my eyelids. Its back was to me as it reached the other side of the road. Its legs, its thighs were like tree trunks, muscles bunching and flexing under that dark, matted hair. And then it leaped. There's a drainage ditch on that side, maybe 8 feet across and 4 feet deep. It didn't even break stride. It just launched itself from the edge of the road, this powerful, effortless leap, and cleared the entire ditch, landing in the grass on the other side with a soft, heavy thud I could actually hear over the dying screech of my tires. It never looked back. It just vanished into the blackness of the opposite field, swallowed up by the night in 2 more of those silent, impossible strides. My car had skidded to a stop, angled slightly across the lane. The engine had stalled. For a second, there was just silence, a deep, ringing, terrible silence. Then the sounds rushed back in, the chirping of crickets, the hum of the dead engine, and the sound of my own ragged, panicked breathing. I was frozen. My hands were locked onto the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I couldn't move. I just stared into the empty black field where it had disappeared, expecting it to come back, expecting to see 2 glowing eyes staring back at me. My whole body was trembling, a fine, uncontrollable shake that started in my hands and ran all the way through me. I felt cold, ice cold, despite the warm air coming through the window. The window. The thought hit me like a bucket of cold water. The window was down. It was open. Anything could reach in. I fumbled for the window switch, my fingers clumsy and numb. I hit the master control for all the windows, hearing them whir up, the sound unbearably loud in the silence. The moment the last one sealed shut, I hit the door lock button. Thunk, 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 thunk. The sound was so final, so reassuring, but it didn't make me feel safe. I was in a metal and glass box, and I had never felt more exposed. I couldn't stay there. What if it was circling back? What if there were more? I turned the key with a hand that was shaking so badly I could barely fit it in the ignition. The engine turned over and roared to life. I didn't even think about checking for traffic. I just slammed the gear shift into drive and stomped on the gas. The tires spun for a second before catching, and the car lurched forward. I drove. I don't know how fast. I just stared straight ahead, my eyes glued to the tunnel of light, my headlights carved out of the darkness. Every shadow at the edge of the road made me flinch. Every tree stump looked like a crouching figure. I was sobbing, gasping for air between sobs. I couldn't get the image out of my head. The profile, the shoulders, the way it leaped. I needed to hear a human voice. I fumbled for my phone in the passenger seat, my vision blurry with tears. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb slipping on the screen. I hit Mom. It rang twice before she picked up, her voice fuzzy with sleep. Heather? Honey, what's wrong? I tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked sob. Mom, I finally gasped. Mom, something was on the road. What? What was it? A deer? Are you okay? Did you hit it? No, it wasn't a deer, I said, my voice high and tight with panic. It was a thing, a big thing. It ran across the road. It jumped the ditch. Mom, it was huge. I was babbling, I knew it, but I couldn't stop. I described it as best I could. The height, the hair, the shoulders, the way it moved. I told her where I was, that I was almost home. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear the concern in her voice. Heather, just come home. Just drive safe, okay? Keep your doors locked. I'll put the coffee on. The rest of the drive is a blur. I pulled into our driveway, ran inside, and my mom was waiting at the door. I must have looked a mess, pale, shaking, eyes wide. I told her the whole story again, more coherently this time. She listened, her face serious. She didn't tell me I was crazy. She's lived out here her whole life. And she knows the woods and fields hold things you can't always explain. She just held me and let me talk until I finally calmed down enough to stop shaking. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it leaping. The next day, after my exam, which I'm sure I failed, I drove back. In the bright, clear light of a Wednesday afternoon, it looked so different, so normal. The sun was shining, birds were singing. I pulled over to the exact spot, my tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. I got out of the car, my legs felt weak. I walked to the edge of the road where I'd seen it land after clearing the ditch. The grass there was tall and green, and it was matted down, not just bent but pressed flat, like something very heavy had landed there, a perfect, unmistakable patch of crushed grass, right where it should have been. I looked across the road to the field where I'd first seen it. The hay bale was there, nothing else, just a quiet, empty field. I stood there for a long time, just staring at that matted grass. There were no footprints I could see, no fur caught on the barbed wire fence, no proof. Just that one patch of flattened grass and a memory that's carved into me. A memory of something that shouldn't exist, moving with a strength and a speed that wasn't meant for this world. I got back in my car and drove home, and I haven't taken that road after dark since. And I keep thinking about its profile, those massive shoulders and thighs, and the way it just vanished into the night like it was never there at all.